Greetings, Lore Masters. Tonight, our chronicle covers a single, unbroken line of power that stretches from the dawn of human history on Tamriel, all the way to a cold, grey morning in the town of Helgen. We are tracing the full, winding history of the Dragonborn legacy. We see the sigil everywhere, that broken-winged dragon, but the blood and the blessing it represents is so much more than just shouting at bandits until they ragdoll off a mountain. It's a divine contract, a burden, and a destiny that has shaped the very fabric of the continent. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes as an Ayleid flesh sculpture without some serious divine intervention. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. It's always nice to know where in the world the lore is reaching. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before the Nords shouted at the snow, before the Redguards sailed from their drowned continent, and long before the Septims ever minted a coin, there was Cyrodiil. But it was not the green and pleasant land we know. In the Merethic era, this was the heartland of the Aldmer, the ancestors of all elves, and the masters who ruled it were the Ayleids, the Wild Elves, the Heartland High Elves. They were magnificent. They were terrifying. Their cities were marvels of alien beauty, built not from rough stone and timber, but from crystallized magic, starlight, and secrets stolen from the Daedra. They pierced the sky in gleaming white spires, anchored by Welkind and Vala stones that pulsed with captured magicka. At the centre of it all was the White Gold Tower, a spike of divine architecture aimed directly at the heavens, a place of such power it was said to be a focal point of creation itself. The Ayleids were sorcerer kings, and their understanding of the magical arts, particularly the School of Alteration, was profound. They didn't just build with magic, they lived it. They saw the mundane world, the world of dirt and flesh, as a crude draft, something to be corrected and perfected. And into this land of cruel perfection came the ancestors of men, the Needies. They were scattered, primitive tribes, refugees from the frozen north of Atmora, seeking only survival. The Ayleids saw them not as neighbours, but as raw materials. The Needs became a slave race, the foundation upon which the gleaming Ayleid Empire was built. But this was not simple servitude. This was not merely forced labour, chains and whips. To the Ayleids, the Needs were a canvas. This is where the stories get dark, where the lullaby curdles. The Ayleids practiced arts that are now lost, and thankfully so. They were masters of flesh sculpture, twisting the bodies of their human slaves into living works of art, grotesque servants, and mindless beasts of burden. They cultivated gut gardens, horrific displays where slaves were altered to grow exotic flora from within their own living bodies. They lit their highways with the entrapped souls of men, women and children. When you wander through Cyrodiil, delving into those crumbling, trap-filled ruins, you are walking through the very foundations of this nightmare. Every Ayleid ruin, from Vilverin to Wendelbeck, was built and maintained by the suffering of these proto-Cyrodiilic humans. Those glowing white stones are beautiful, yes, but they are stained. The Ayleids did not just rule, they curated their slaves' suffering. They drew their power and their artistic inspiration from the Daedric princes. While some clans merely paid tribute, many of the most powerful, like the rulers of the White Gold Tower, were devout Daedra worshippers. They trafficked with Molag Bal, the king of rape, with Mehrunes Dagon, the prince of destruction, and with Meridia, whose relationship with the Ayleids is complicated. She's a hater of the undead, certainly, but her purifying light can be just as terrible and absolute as any other dark pact. This period of enslavement lasted for generations, an age of hopelessness. The Needs were broken, scattered, and bred for docility. They had no army, no heroes, and seemingly no gods. But in the darkness of the slave pens, a new faith was flickering. The Needies, in their desperation, had begun to synthesize a new religion. They still vaguely remembered the old gods of Atmora, but they began to pray to new spirits, new hopes, and one god, distant and silent, began to listen. Akatosh, the great dragon god of time. This is the crucible. This is the absolute lightless despair from which the Dragonborn legacy would be born. It wasn't a gift given to a proud warrior, it was a lifeline thrown to a slave. a young woman named Alessia was born into this world. She was a slave in the Ayleid capital, perhaps even in the White Gold Tower itself. We don't know the precise details of her early life, only that she witnessed the totality of its horror. She saw the flesh gardens, she heard the screams that echoed in the starry halls, and she prayed. She prayed with a fervour that no one else had managed. She prayed not just for freedom, not just for revenge, but for an end to the Ayleid mastery of the world. She begged Akatosh for aid, and her pleas were joined by other nascent divine sparks: Morihaus, the winged bull of heaven, who would descend to be her champion, and Pelinal Whitestrake, the brutal, beautiful, terrifying warrior demigod who would arrive as her sword. The Ayleids were not a monolith. This is a common misconception. While the Daedra-worshipping tyrants of central Cyrodiil were the dominant power, many in-game texts, like the tragicomedy of Yin Po, hint at other factions. There were Ayleid clans who fled to Valenwood to escape the fanaticism of their peers. There were those who, in the coming rebellion, would actually defect and fight alongside Alessia, horrified by the excesses of their own kind. They saw the rot in their perfect, gleaming cities. This complexity, of course, means little to the average slave. When your entire world is defined by magical torture, the subtle political differences between your masters are rather academic. The community of lawmasters still argues intensely about the true nature of Pelinal Whitestrake, Alessia's champion. Was he a time-travelling cyborg? A Shezareen? An avatar of the dead human-loving god Lorcan? Or was he, as the elves claimed, simply a blood-mad demon clad in mismatched armour? The truth, as always in the Elder Scrolls, is probably a confusing, contradictory and fascinating all of the above. His madness and his divine purpose were inseparable. Alessia was the spark, Pelinal was the fire, Morihaus was the banner. But the covenant, the legacy that would define the next 3,000 years of history, had not yet been forged. The world was holding its breath. The Ayleids, blinded by their own arrogance and lost in their decadent, cruel arts, had no idea what was coming. They believed their mastery was absolute. They believed their pacts with the Daedra made them invincible. They believed the Needis were cattle, incapable of organised thought, let alone war. They were wrong. Alessia, the slave queen, was about to strike a deal with the greatest dragon of all. A deal that would elevate her, bless her bloodline, and fundamentally rewrite the rules of Mundus. She would trade her mortality and the mortality of all her descendants for a single divine promise, that as long as her bloodline reigned, the gates of oblivion would remain sealed. This was the genesis. The pain was the catalyst. The rebellion was the mechanism. And the blessing, the dragon blood itself, would be the reward, and the chain. The first Dragonborn of Cyrodiil was about to make herself known, not with a shout, but with a prayer that would shake the foundations of the White Gold Tower. The age of elven dominion was about to drown in a sea of righteous, desperate, and divinely backed human violence. The prayer of the slave queen did not echo in an empty heaven. It was answered. It was answered with a bellowing roar and a flash of maddened holy light. The Ayleid masters in their star tower saw a new, impossible constellation. A winged bull, Morihaus Breath of Kine, descending in a golden halo, and beside him, a figure of terrible, blinding white. He was Pelinal Whitestrake, the star-made knight, the divine crusader, and he was the engine of their destruction. Where Alessia was the soul of the rebellion, Pelinal was its wrath. He was a being of contradictions, a warrior clad in futuristic armour that hummed with an unknown magic, yet he wielded a mace and sword with the savagery of a berserker. He was a divine agent, yet he was prone to fits of madness, killing joys, where his holy purpose was drowned in a red tide of indiscriminate slaughter. The slave rebellion exploded. What had been isolated, hopeless uprisings in the jungle, thick forest of Cyrodiil, suddenly had a nucleus. Pelinal, Morihaus, and Alessia's nascent human armies began a scorched earth campaign that tore through the heartland. Pelinal was unstoppable. He was a one-man army, a demigod who saw the Ayleid cities not as fortresses, but as firewood. He tore through their legions of slave soldiers, their summoned Daedra, and their flesh atrocities. He was, as the texts say, Pelinal the Blamer, Pelinal the Third, because silvery paranoia confused him. He saw Ayleid sorcery in everything, and he met it with a violence that shocked even his own allies. core in-game fact. The legend of Pelinal, which players can engage with directly in Knights of the Nine, is complex. The Song of Pelinal, a multi-volume in-game saga, details his crusade. It famously recounts his hatred for all elves, not just the Aelids. At one point, his own soldiers had to beg him to stop slaughtering a group of Khajiit, whom he had mistaken for another breed of Aldmeri. His madness was as profound as his power. This holy, genocidal rage was exactly what the rebellion needed. The Aelids, for the first time in history, knew fear. Their flesh magic was useless against a being who seemed to be an avatar of Lorcan himself, the missing god of men. While Pelinal was the bloody sword, Alessia was the political and spiritual mind. She forged alliances. She brought together the disparate Need tribes. Crucially, she also welcomed the aid of sympathetic Aeliad lords who had grown disgusted with the Daedra worship of their kin. She even secured the support of the Nords from the north. The Sons of Snow, fresh from their own war against dragons, heard the call of human liberation and marched south to join her cause. This was a world war. It was brutal, magical, and utterly desperate. The Aeliad Empire began to crumble from within. Their perfect starlit cities were not designed to withstand a siege of this magnitude, especially not one led by a demigod who could shout the walls down. The Sorcerer Kings retreated to their greatest fortress, the very heart of their power, the White Gold Tower in the Imperial City. This, then, was the final battle, the Siege of the White Gold Tower. The tower was not just a palace, it was a cosmic instrument. It was a stone of reality, an echo of the adamantine tower where the gods had first decided the fate of Mundus. It was immensely powerful, warded by the most potent Aeliad sorcery, and it was the centre of their Daedric pacts. A fascinating and often overlooked detail from in-game sources like Shazar and the Divines is that the Aelids inside the White Gold Tower were not united. The final king of the Aelids, Anumaril, was not even in power. He had been usurped by his own sorcerer general, Umaril the Unfeathered. When Alessia's armies finally breached the city, they were effectively attacking an Aeliad empire already in the midst of a civil war. Umaril, a half-elf and a devout servant of Meridia, was a brutal tyrant who had overthrown his Daedra-worshipping masters only to install his own fanatical, light-obsessed rule. Pelinal, enraged, sought out his rival. The battle between Pelinal Whitestrake and Umaril the Unfeathered is the stuff of legend. It was a clash of titans that shook the city. Pelinal famously ate Umaril's magic, absorbing the Sorcerer King's power before finally striking him down. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The dying Aeliad lords, in their final spiteful act, cursed Pelinal, and their combined magic was enough to dismember the knight, scattering his body. He had won the war, but he would not live to see the peace. With Pelinal dead and the Aeliad leadership shattered, Alessia and her armies took the White Gold Tower. The needies, the cattle, the flesh sculptures were masters of the Heartland. But this victory was fragile. The world was broken. The Aeliads had built their empire on Daedric pacts, and with their fall, those pacts were screaming in the void. The barriers between Mundus and Oblivion, already thin, were threatening to tear completely. Mehrunes Dagon and Molag Bal saw an opportunity, a world ripe for the taking. The doors to Oblivion were swinging wide open. This was Alessia's true crisis. She had won her people's freedom, only to potentially doom the entire world to a Daedric invasion. She ascended to the pinnacle of the White Gold Tower, to the chamber that the Aeliads had used to traffic with their Dark Masters. She called out, not to the Daedra, but to the Aedra. She called to Akatosh, the dragon god of time, the one who had sent Pelinal, the one who had blessed her struggle. She begged for a solution. She offered herself, her people, and her entire bloodline in exchange for salvation. Akatosh answered. In that holy chamber, the dragon god himself, or a manifestation of him, appeared to the slave queen. He drew a single drop of his own divine blood and mingled it with Alessia's. In that moment, he forged a covenant. This was the birth of the Dragonborn legacy as Cyrodiil would know it. Akatosh gave Alessia and her descendants the dragon blood, a divine soul, and with it, he gave her an artifact, the Amulet of Kings. This amulet, which we all know as that iconic red diamond, was the physical key to the covenant. It was forged from a soul gem of a saint and set in a divine metal, and at its heart was the Chimel Adabal, the red diamond. which was said to be the crystallized blood of Lorcan himself, found ages ago. By placing his own blood covenant within it, Akatosh created the ultimate lock. The nature of this divine bargain is still hotly debated. Was Akatosh a willing saviour, answering the plea of a faithful follower? Or was the dragon god of time, whose very nature is stasis and order, compelled to act? Some theories suggest that Alessia, standing at the centre stone of the White Golden Tower, in a moment of cosmic instability, with the aid of Lorcan's heart blood, the amulet, effectively forced Akatosh's hand. She created a rent in time that only he could sew up, and the covenant was the thread. It may not have been a gift, but a brilliant, desperate act of divine blackmail. The terms of the deal were simple and absolute. So long as a true heir of Alessia's bloodline, a Dragonborn, wore the Amulet of Kings and sat upon the throne of Cyrodiil, the White Gold Tower's pacts would be rewritten. The power that once welcomed the Daedra would now be used to bar them. The amulet would light the dragon fires in the temples of the Imperial City. These fires were not mere symbols, they were the physical manifestation of the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion. If the fires were lit, the gates were sealed. If the fires ever went out, if the throne was ever empty of a true Dragonborn heir, the covenant would be broken, the wards would fall, and the Daedra would return. Alessia, the first empress of the new Cyrodiilic Empire, put the amulet around her neck. The dragonfires roared to life. The sky which had begun to tear open healed. Mundus was safe. She had freed her people. But in doing so, she had shackled her own soul and the souls of all her children to the throne. The Dragonborn legacy was no longer just a blessing. It was an eternal, crushing duty. The Amulet of Kings was now the most important object on the continent, the literal key to the world's survival, and the blood that could wear it, the dragon blood, was now the most precious and most hunted commodity in history. The dragon blood was now the bedrock of an empire. Alessia's covenant had transformed her from a slave warrior into the first in a long, sacred line of emperors. Her dynasty, and the dynasties that would follow, ruled by a new principle, divine right. This was not a philosophical claim. It was a physical, magical, and provable reality. You were the emperor because, and only because, you were Dragonborn. How was this proven? It was simple. The Amulet of Kings, the sacred artifact containing the blood pact with Akatosh, would not suffer a pretender. Only one of the true dragon blood could wear it. If an emperor died, the heir would be brought to the Temple of the One. They would place the amulet around their neck. If it wore them, if it settled and its magic remained stable, they were the true heir. The dragonfires in the temple would then be ceremonially relit by the new emperor, renewing the covenant for another generation. If a usurper, a pretender, or even a well-meaning but non-Dragonborn regent tried to put it on, the amulet would reject them. It would fall from their grasp, or perhaps even burn them. Their legitimacy would be exposed as a fraud in an instant. This is the central driving mechanic of imperial succession, as explained to the player in the Elder Scrolls IV, Oblivion. The line of emperors was the line of Dragonborn. Their entire political and religious authority stemmed from their unique biological ability to interact with the Amulet of Kings and thus keep the dragonfires lit. The dragonfires were not just a symbol, they were the literal magical barrier sealing Mundus from oblivion. The Alessian Empire, the first empire of men, ruled for centuries based on this principle. The lineage was not always strong. There were periods of internal strife, weakness, and questionable rulers, but as long as someone with Alessia's blood sat the throne and wore the amulet, the fires burned, and the world was safe from large-scale Daedric invasion. During this time, the Dragonborn legacy of Cyrodiil took on a very different meaning from the one we know in Skyrim. It had little to do with shouting or absorbing dragon souls. Dragons were at this point largely extinct or in hiding. To be Dragonborn meant you were the emperor. It was a stamp of legitimacy, a sign of your pact with the chief god, Akatosh. But humans, even those divinely blessed, are prone to fanaticism. Within the new, human-led empire, a religious movement began to fester. It was called the Alessian Order. It was a hyper-strict monotheistic cult that worshipped the One, a simplification of Akatosh. The order was xenophobic, puritanical, and most of all, virulently anti-elven. This is where the lore gets truly strange, in that classic Elder Scrolls way. The Alessian Order hated that their god, Akatosh, was also worshipped by the elves as Ariel. They saw the elven aspect of the dragon god as a taint, a contamination, so they decided to fix it, a sect. Within the order, the Miraak Selective held a ritual that lasted for 1008 years. They danced on the white gold tower, using its cosmic power in an attempt to perform the ultimate act of magical surgery, to cut the elven Oriel out of the divine flesh of Akatosh. This was an act of unfathomable hubris. They were trying to rewrite their own god. The result was not a purified god. The result was the Middle Dawn, or the Dragon Break. By tampering with the god of time, they broke time itself. For over a millennium, linear history simply ceased. It shattered into a million contradictory, simultaneous maybes. Later scholars would look back and see 1,000 years of non-history, where texts claimed people were alive and dead at the same time, where kingdoms rose and fell in the span of a day, and where the sun itself was stolen from the sky. This catastrophe, born from human fanaticism, eventually led to the collapse of the Alessian Order and the First Empire. The dragon bloodline of Alessia became thin, fractured, and eventually was lost to the chaos of the interregnum. The dragonfires went out. For centuries, Cyrodiil was plunged into a dark age. Warlords, petty kings, and cults carved up the heartland. The covenant was broken. The world, it seemed, was defenceless. The Daedric princes must have been licking their lips. And then, from the east came a new threat. An invasion of Tamriel by the Akaviri, the snake men of the Tsaishi. They landed in the north and cut a bloody path south, their motives unknown. They were skilled, relentless, and seemed to despise all of Tamriel's native races. The shattered kingdoms of men were powerless. But a new warlord was rising from the Colovian west, Reman Cyrodiil. He rallied the human armies and prepared to meet the Saisi invaders at a place called Pale Pass, in the mountains bordering Skyrim. This is where the legacy was reborn. As Reman's army prepared for a suicidal last stand, the Akaviri vanguard halted. Their leaders approached Reman, and then, in a moment that would change history, they knelt. They threw down their dikatanas and prostrated themselves before him. Why? Because they heard it, or saw it, or felt it. When Reman spoke to his troops, his voice was filled with a power they had not heard in an age. The Akaviri, who came from a land obsessed with dragons, recognized the soul of a dragon. They recognized a Dragonborn. This event is the source of a massive community debate. The Tsaishi are known as dragon hunters, and supposedly dragon eaters. Were they invading Tamriel? Or were they on a desperate generations-long crusade to find a Dragonborn, the only being they deemed worthy of ruling? Many fans believe the entire invasion was a search. The Saisi, having allegedly consumed all the dragons of their own continent, were a culture that worshipped the dragon blood. When they found Reman, their holy quest was over. They had found their god-king. Almost overnight, the Akaviri invaders became the most fanatical, loyal core of Reman's new army. They called him the Dragonborn and dedicated their lives to his service. They would go on to become the Dragon Guard, the personal bodyguard of the Emperor, and eventually the organisation we know as the Blades. Where did Reman's dragon blood come from? Was he a distant, forgotten descendant of Alessia, his lineage hidden in the Colovian hills? Or did Akatosh, seeing the world in peril once more, simply create a new Dragonborn to meet the crisis? The lore remains silent. All that mattered was the proof. Reman Cyrodiil marched south to the Imperial City, which had long been held by Colovian warlords. He entered the Temple of the One, took up the Amulet of Kings, and it settled around his neck as if it were made for him. He was the One. The dragonfires were relit. The Covenant was restored. The Second Empire, the Reman Dynasty, was born. This new dynasty, built on a foundation of Akaviri loyalty and Colovian strength, became one of the most glorious in history. The Reman emperors were warrior poets, conquerors, and worldly gods. They ruled with the absolute authority of the dragon blood. For generations, the Covenant held strong. The Reman dynasty was the high water mark of the Dragonborn emperors, a time of strength, stability, and imperial expansion. But like the first, this empire was also mortal. It was not a Daedric prince or an elven army that ended it. It was simple, human treachery. The last of the line, Reman III, was assassinated. His son and heir, Prince Julek, was also murdered shortly after. The assassins were agents of the Morag Tong, the Dark Guild from Morrowind. But the architect of the plot was Reman's own Akaviri potentate, his Saishi chancellor, Vasidu Shai. With the entire Dragonborn line severed, the potentate seized control of the empire. He declared the end of the Reman dynasty and the beginning of the Second Era, and here was the crisis repeated. Vasidu Shai was a powerful, immortal, and brilliant ruler. He held the empire together by sheer force of will. But he was a Saishi. He was not Dragonborn. He could sit on the ruby throne, he could command the legions, but he could not wear the Amulet of Kings. The dragonfires went out. For more than 400 years the Akaviri potentates ruled Tamriel, and for 400 years the covenant was broken. The Amulet of Kings sat in a vault, cold and unworn. The barrier to oblivion was unsecured. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the disaster that was sure to come. The throne was empty of the dragon blood, and that vacuum was an invitation to chaos. For more than 400 years the dragonfires remained cold. The Akaviri potentates, Vasidu Shai and his son Severian Korak, ruled with a cold, serpentine grip. They were effective in their own way, but they were not Dragonborn. The world lived under an uneasy peace, a peace where every citizen with a lick of sense knew that the barriers to oblivion were unsecured. The Amulet of Kings sat in a vault, a useless, pretty bauble, waiting for a hand that would not be rejected. This fragile stability, built on Akaviri martial law, could not last. Both potentates were eventually assassinated by the Morag Tong, and with their deaths, the Second Empire truly and finally shattered. What followed was the long, dark, bloody night of the interregnum. This was an age of unparalleled chaos. The Second Era descended into a free-for-all. Tamriel fractured into 1,000 petty kingdoms, warlord states, and religious fiefdoms. Cyrodiil itself, the heartland of civilization, became a brawling pit of Colovian warlords and Nibonese merchant princes, all vying to claim a piece of the broken ruby throne. The imperial city was sacked, rebuilt, and sacked again. This was the era of three banners, a story for another night, a time of total continental war. For centuries there was no emperor, there was no covenant. The world, it seemed, had simply forgotten the Dragonborn legacy. It was a fairy tale from a lost golden age. The Daedric princes took full advantage. Molag Bal, in a particularly horrific event known as the Planemeld, attempted to pull all of Tamriel into his realm of Cold Harbour. The world was saved, barely, but the point was made. Without the dragonfires, Mundus was prey. The world was desperate. It was waiting for a unifier, a new Reman, a new Alessia. It got, instead, a man named Hjalti Earlybeard. He was not a great king or a noble. He was a general, a brilliant and utterly ruthless tactician, in the service of a Colovian warlord named Khulakain. Khulakain had a simple, impossible dream: to reunite Cyrodiil and declare himself emperor. In Hjalti he had the weapon to do it. But Hjalti was special. He was a Nord, or perhaps a Breton with Nord blood, who had spent time in High Rock. Crucially, he had also spent time in Skyrim. He had journeyed to High Hrothgar. He had spoken with the Greybeards. Hjalti Earlybeard could shout. This was the first inkling. This was a different kind of Dragonborn. The Cyrodiilic emperors had the dragon blood, a passive political and spiritual inheritance. It let them wear the amulet. But Hjalti had the dragon soul in the ancient Nordic sense. He had the Dovah-Kiin, the voice. The legends of his campaigns are still told in Skyrim. At the critical battle of Old Hroldan, his army was stalled against the walls of the Reachman. Hjalti, in a fit of tactical frustration, unleashed the voice. He didn't just push one or two men back. The legends say his Thuum was so powerful it shouted the stone walls to dust. His terrified, awestruck Nord soldiers gave him a new name that day: Talos, Stormcrown. Talos, as he was now known, was the engine of Khulakain's conquest. He was the hero, the general, the one the people loved. Khulakain was the politician, the man who would wear the crown. They marched on the imperial city, unified the heartland for the first time in an age, and prepared to found a new dynasty. And then, on the very night of the coronation, Khulakain was assassinated. A shadowy killer, allegedly a Breton Nightblade from High Rock, slit the warlord's throat and set fire to the palace. Tiber Septim, for this is the name Hjalti now took for himself, was grievously wounded in the attack, his throat cut so deeply that he could never again speak or shout. He rallied the troops, pointed the finger at High Rock, and took the ruby throne for himself in the name of his murdered master, Dovah-Kiin. This is the official story, but there is another darker one whispered in forbidden texts. The Arcturian Heresy is an in-game book that paints a far more sinister picture. It claims that Hjalti Earlybeard, Tiber Septim, was a traitor. It claims he was the one who murdered Dovah-Kiin. It claims he cut his own throat slightly to mask his guilt and to conveniently silence the one man who could challenge his narrative. The heresy claims Septim was a sociopath, a backstabber, and a brilliant, monstrous liar. It gets darker. The heresy also suggests that the man who shouted down the walls of Old Herolden wasn't Hjalti. It was an undead Ash King, a ghost of the Nordic hero Ysmir Wulfharth, who Hjalti had summoned and bound to his service. We will never know the full truth, but this is the violent forging of the Third Empire. It began in blood, betrayal, and a brilliant, brutal power grab. But a warlord is not an emperor. A pretender cannot fool a god. Tiber Septim, his throat wrapped in bandages, his claim to the throne cemented only by the loyalty of his legions, walked into the Temple of the One. He found the Amulet of Kings, which had sat dormant for nearly half a millennium. He picked it up, and he put it on. It fit. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, in his infinite reptilian wisdom, accepted this bloody-handed usurper. He accepted this backstabbing general. He accepted him as a true Dragonborn. In that moment, the dragonfires roared to life. The Covenant, broken since the assassination of Reman III, was restored. The Third Era was declared. The world was safe again, sealed by the divine pact. Once again, the lore is ambiguous. Was Septim a distant lost relative of the Reman or Alessian lines? Or did Akatosh, seeing a world on the brink and a man strong enough to save it, simply make him Dragonborn? Did he rewrite reality and graft this new soul onto the old lineage? Or does the dragon blood simply mean anyone whom Akatosh chooses, or anyone strong enough to force the god's hand? Regardless, Tiber Septim was the legitimate, divinely sanctioned Emperor of Tamriel, and he intended to rule all of it. His conquests were brutal and total. He crushed all remaining resistance in High Rock and Hammerfell, but one foe remained, the Aldmeri Dominion. The High Elves of the Somerset Isles, in their magical, unassailable island continent, refused to bow. Their navy was supreme, their magic unmatched. Septim's new empire, powerful as it was, could not touch them. So, Tiber Septim turned to a secret, forbidden weapon. As part of a political treaty with the living gods of Morrowind, Tiber Septim had been given a gift. It was the Numidium, a 1,000-foot-tall construct of brass, a mechanical god built by the Dwemer. It was powered by the heart of Lorcan, the literal divine heart of the world. It was a weapon of mass destruction that functioned by refusing reality. It was an engine of no. Septim unleashed the brass god on the Somerset Isles. The war that was meant to last decades was over in an hour. The Numidium walked across the ocean, and when the High Elf armies and navies met it, it simply said no. And they weren't. They were erased from time. It broke their cities. It broke their bloodlines. It broke their reality. This act of uncreation was so violent it caused another dragon break, a localized shattering of time. This was how Tiber Septim forged his empire, not just with swords and shouts, but with a weaponized paradox, a literal god of brass and blasphemy. He had done it. He had united all of Tamriel for the first time in history. He ruled long and hard, and when he died, he did something no other Dragonborn had ever done. He ascended. He became a god. The how of this is, again, the subject of the most intense debates. Did he achieve Chim, the secret royalty of the universe, by realizing he was a figment in a god's dream and refusing to disappear? Or was the Arcturian heresy right again, that he tricked his battle mage, Zurin Arctus, and his general Wulfharth, and used a Dwemer artifact to absorb both of their souls, merging them with his own to create a new, threefold divine being? Hjalti, Arctus, Wulfharth. 3 souls, 1 god. Talos, the 9th divine. Tiber Septim, the man, had begun his life as a minor general. He ended it as a god, worshipped by the very empire he'd forged in blood, lies, and the fire of a mechanical god. He had restored the Dragonborn covenant, and now his descendants would rule, under the protection of their own divine deified ancestor. Tiber Septim, the god, ascended to Aetherius. Tiber Septim, the man, left behind a mortal, fractious and very troubled family. The dynasty he founded would rule for 433 years, but it would be a reign defined less by his divine strength and more by human, all too human, weakness. His son, Pelagius I, inherited an empire that had been hammered into one piece by a demigod. Now he had to actually govern it, and for a brief time it worked. But the problem with being the son of a new god is that you make a lot of enemies. Pelagius I was assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood while praying in the Temple of the One, setting a rather grim precedent for the dynasty. The throne passed to his cousin, Kintira I, and the empire enjoyed a brief prosperous peace. Good rulers make for boring stories. The Septim line's true drama, the dark, juicy, necromantic centre of its history, begins with the children of Pelagius Septim II. He had 3 heirs, Antiochus, Potema, and Sepphoris. Antiochus was the eldest, a man known for his charm, his extravagance, and his revolving door of mistresses. He was a creature of the court, a lover of parties, and not particularly concerned with the burdens of rule. Sepphoris was the stoic, martial brother, a man of the legions and of duty. And then there was Potema. Potema was married off in a political match to the King of Solitude in Skyrim. She was brilliant, she was ambitious, she was ruthless, and she was, to put it mildly, a magical prodigy with an unhealthy fascination with the undead. She was known as the Wolf Queen of Solitude, and she seethed with resentment. She believed that she, not her frivolous brother Antiochus, was the one who deserved the ruby throne. When Antiochus took the throne, his reign was as weak and corrupt as everyone expected. Potema from her northern kingdom watched and plotted. She gave birth to a son, Uriel Mantiaco, and began whispering that he was the true heir. When Antiochus finally died, his daughter Kintira II, our Kintira is the first, this is the second, was named Empress. This was the moment Potema struck. She declared Kintira II a bastard, declared her own son Uriel the true emperor, and plunged Tamriel into the single most destructive civil war in its history, the War of the Red Diamond. This was not a war of simple armies. Potema, from her fortress in Solitude, unleashed hell. She was a master necromancer. She summoned Daedra. She made pacts. She raised legions of the undead. Her enemies weren't just fighting soldiers, they were fighting their own fallen comrades, reanimated and sent back into the fray. Core in-game fact. In the Elder Scrolls, FARMV, Skyrim, the Last Dragonborn can fully explore this dark history. In the quest The Wolf Queen Awakened, you are sent into the catacombs beneath Solitude, which are still haunted by her malevolent spirit. Her evil was so profound, her necromantic power so great, that it stained the very stone of the city. You have to fight your way through her resurrected Draugr and vampire thralls to confront her spectral form, which is still trying to regain power, centuries after her death. The war was a nightmare. Potema and her son Uriel captured the sitting Empress Kintira II and had her disposed of in a dungeon in High Rock. The Wolf Queen's undead armies seemed unstoppable, but her brother Sepphoris, the one who wasn't a sociopath liar, wrong sociopath liar, the one who wasn't a necromancer, rallied the loyalist legions. The war lasted for a decade. It bled the empire white. Potema's son Uriel was eventually captured and killed, but Potema herself refused to surrender. She barricaded herself inside her city of Solitude, and the war became a grinding, horrific siege. The in-game book series The Wolf Queen details the grim end of the siege. When the Imperial legions finally breached the throne room of Solitude, they found Potema sitting on her throne. She had been dead for weeks. She had died of starvation or poison, but her unholy will, her sheer necromantic spite, was so strong that she had remained animate, her rotting corpse continuing to command her undead armies until the very end. Sepphoris won the war. He took the throne, wore the amulet, and relit the dragon fires. The covenant was secure, but the dynasty was shattered, its coffers empty, its people exhausted, and its bloodline now carrying a dark, mad taint. Sepphoris ruled, and then his brother Magnus, and then Magnus's son, Pelagius Septim III. We all know this one, Pelagius the Mad. From the moment he took the throne, it was clear something was wrong. He wasn't just eccentric, He was, in the clinical dictionary definition sense, completely insane. He would bite courtiers. He would burst into fits of shrieking laughter during solemn state funerals. He once attempted to outlaw death, and became furious when people continued to die. He insisted on speaking only in grunts for a month, and had a man executed for talking too much. His reign was a disaster, a dark comedy that would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. The empire, still fragile, was being run by a lunatic. What exactly caused the madness of Pelagius III? This is a favourite topic in the lore community. The simplest answer is a hereditary flaw, a taint in the Septim blood that had been festering for generations. But the more poetic and darker theory suggests it was a curse. Specifically, that the undead spirit of his great-aunt Potema, the Wolf Queen, had laid a curse of madness upon her brother's entire line as her final act of vengeance. And of course, there is the ever-present Sheogorath. The quests in both Oblivion, Shivering Isles, and Skyrim, the Mind of Madness, heavily imply that Pelagius's mind was a favourite playground for the Daedric Prince of Madness himself. The empire was saved not by a warrior, but by a patient, brilliant woman, Pelagius's wife, the Empress Cataria. While Pelagius was off trying to baptise the palace cats, Cataria was declared Empress Regent. She, a Dunmer, an outsider, ruled the empire with a firm and capable hand for decades. She healed the wounds of the civil war, stabilised the economy, and patiently cleaned up her husband's messes. She was, ironically, one of the greatest rulers in the entire Septim line. Pelagius III was eventually retired to a sanatorium where he died peacefully, or was perhaps smothered with a pillow. The records are conveniently vague. The dynasty limped on. It recovered slowly under Cataria and her sons. But the Septim luck, if it ever existed, was running thin. Generations later, another catastrophe, the Camoran usurper. A Bosmer warlord named Reman Camoran, who claimed a distant and likely fictional Septim relation, launched another war to claim the throne. This was, in effect, a repeat of the War of the Red Diamond, complete with legions of Daedra and undead. The usurper's Worm Throne army marched from Valenwood to High Rock, sacking cities and overwhelming the imperial legions. The war lasted for 20 years. It bled the empire dry again. The Camoran usurper was eventually defeated, but the message was clear. The Septim line was weak, and the forces of Oblivion were getting bolder. And so we come to the present. We come to the end of the Third Era. After all this blood, all this madness, all this war, the Empire finally found a moment of peace. It came in the form of Uriel Septim VII, the man we meet in the sewers at the start of the Elder Scrolls Thief, Oblivion. He was a good emperor, wise, just, and he ruled for a long time. His reign was a golden age, a period of such stability and prosperity that the common folk began to forget the horrors of the Wolf Queen and the usurper. He had 3 strong, healthy sons to succeed him, Geldal, Enman and Ebel. The line was secure, the amulet was safe. The dragon fires burned brightly in the temple, but Uriel VII was a Septim, and the Septims were dreamers. They had visions. As he entered his old age, his dreams, which had once guided him, turned to nightmares. He saw cities on fire, he saw red skies, he saw monstrous 4-armed shadows and the gaping, fiery maw of Oblivion itself. He saw the death of his sons, he saw the end of his bloodline. In the shadows of his gleaming, peaceful empire, a new cult was growing. It was not a collection of ragged hermits in a cave. It was organised, it was wealthy, it was sophisticated, and it was populated by high-ranking nobles, mages and citizens, all dedicated to a single terrible master, Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction. They called themselves the Mythic Dawn, and their plan was simple. Assassinate the Emperor, assassinate all of his heirs, sever the dragon bloodline, put out the dragon fires, permanently. The long, troubled history of the Septim Dynasty, born in the bloody ambition of Tiber Septim, was about to end. The assassins were sharpening their blades, the covenant was about to be broken. Uriel Septim VII, the wise old emperor, had dreamed of the end, and the end came for him not in a glorious battle, but in a damp, stinking sewer. The Mythic Dawn cult was lethally efficient. They were not a rabble, they were a network of sleeper agents who had infiltrated the highest levels of the imperial court. In a single, coordinated night of terror they struck. The Emperor's 3 sons, Geldal, Enman and Ebel, were murdered. each in his own home, in his own bed, or at his own desk. Assassins in those now infamous red and black robes emerged from the shadows, their enchanted daggers finding their marks. The entire line of succession, the product of 400 years of the Septim Dynasty, was erased in an hour. The Septim bloodline, the sacred divine inheritance that had kept the dragonfires lit, was severed. All that remained was the old man himself. This is, of course, the very beginning of the Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. We, the player, start as a literal nobody, a prisoner in a cell for some forgotten, or perhaps uncommitted, crime. The game's opening is a masterclass in tension. The Emperor of all Tamriel, flanked by his last remaining blades, flees into your cell, using a secret escape route. You're an accidental witness to the last moments of an era. The blades, Glenroy, Boris and their captain, Renaud, are grim, professional and terrified. They are the best in the world, but they are hopelessly outnumbered. The mythic Dawn agents are relentless, pouring into the tunnels, their magical blades glowing. Uriel, however, is strangely calm. He is a man who has already seen his own death in his dreams, and in those same dreams, he saw you. He stops, he looks at you, the prisoner, a complete stranger, a potential cutthroat, and he says, "You, I have seen you in my dreams." This is the moment the gears of fate, which had been grinding to a halt, suddenly engage in a new, violent way. The Emperor, the man whose bloodline is the Covenant, decides in his final moments to trust a random convict with the single most important object on the continent. After Captain Renaud is cut down, Uriel pulls you aside. He presses the Amulet of Kings into your hand, the sacred divine key to reality. The blood pact of Alessia and Akatosh is now in the grimy palm of a person whose name he doesn't even know. He tells you to find him, his last illegitimate son, a priest named Martin, hiding in the city of Kvatch. And then, just as he predicted, a mythic Dawn assassin bursts from a hidden passage and strikes him down. The Emperor Uriel Septim VII, the last of the Septim Dragonborn, slumps to the sewer floor, and across all of Tamriel, in every temple, in every city, the dragonfires go out. The Amulet of Kings in your hand goes cold. The Covenant is broken. The doors to Oblivion, which had been barred for 400 years, are not just unlocked, they are kicked open. The sky turns a hellish, bleeding red. Great monstrous portals, the Oblivion Gates, begin to tear open in the fabric of the world. From them pour the legions of Mehrunes Dagon, the spidery, multi-limbed Daedra, the hulking Sivalai, and the terrifying bipedal tanks of destruction, the Dremora. The Oblivion Crisis has begun. The city of Kvatch is the first to fall. It is completely overrun, its people slaughtered, its count killed, its walls turned to rubble. The attack is a brutal, overwhelming statement. No one is safe. The gods have abandoned you. The Septims are gone. And who is the architect of this apocalypse? Who had the audacity, the power, and the sheer theological arrogance to bring about the end of the world? His name is Mankar Camoran. Mankar was not just a cult leader. He was a heretical genius, a high elf sorcerer who had done the impossible. He had found and read the Mysterium Xarxes, the personal artifact and unholy scripture of Mehrunes Dagon himself. In doing so, he had achieved a dark, twisted form of enlightenment. He believed the Septims, and indeed all of the gods, the Aedra, were liars. He believed Mundus, our world, was a trap, a prison built by Lorcan, and its wardens were the Aedra. He saw Mehrunes Dagon not as a prince of destruction, but as a prince of liberation. Dagon wasn't trying to destroy the world. He was trying to free it from the cage of mortal existence and return it to the glory of Oblivion. And to Mankar, the greatest lie of all, the very key to the prison, was the Dragonborn Covenant. This is where Mankar's philosophy gets truly fascinating and recontextualizes the entire concept of the Dragonborn. In his commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, Mankar completely redefines the term. He claims that the dragon blood of the Septims was a lie, a false inheritance. He claims that he, Mankar, is the true Dragonborn. He argues that to be Dragonborn is not about having Akatosh's blood. It is about the ability to speak with the dragon's voice. He claimed that the true dragon tongue was not the Thuum of the Nords, but the speech of the dragon from the throne of Dagon. He used his voice to rewrite reality, to create his own divine paradise within Oblivion. He saw himself as the Messiah, the true Dovah-Kiin who would break the chains of Akatosh and liberate Tamriel. So, if Mankar Camoran, a high elf, can be Dragonborn by his own definition, and the Septims were Dragonborn by Akatosh's, what does the word even mean? The community has wrestled with this for years. Mankar's claim seems to be that Dragonborn is a state of being, a royalty of the soul that can be achieved, not just inherited. He saw the Septim line as squatters, holding a power they didn't understand while he, through service to Dagon, had earned it. This debate is Dragonborn a bloodline, a gift from Akatosh, or an achievable state of divine power? Is the central question that the series poses. Mankar is the dark, heretical answer to that question. Mankar Camoran, this counter-Dragonborn, had won. He had decapitated the lineage of his rivals. He had shattered their divine pact. He had opened the gates for his god. The legacy of Alessia, of Reman, of Tiber Septim, was finished. It was dust in a sewer. The world was on fire. The only thing standing between Tamriel and its total liberation into Dagon's hell was you, a nameless prisoner, and a bastard priest hiding in a city that was already burning. The Amulet of Kings, the key to it all, was now just a cold, heavy burden in the hands of a nobody. The Dragonborn legacy was, for all intents and purposes, dead. The world was on fire, and the Amulet of Kings was a dead weight, a cold lump of metal in the pocket of a convicted criminal. The last order of a murdered emperor, find Martin in Kvatch, was the only thread left to follow. The journey to Kvatch was a grim pilgrimage into the new heart of hell. The sky was a bruised, angry purple-red, split by the fiery maw of a full-scale Oblivion gate. Refugees streamed away from the city, their faces blank with a terror that went beyond simple war. They weren't fleeing soldiers, they were fleeing a reality that had broken. Kvatch was not a city, it was a ruin, a smoking crater, a testament to the speed of Dagon's victory. The streets were littered with the charred, twisted bodies of citizens and guards, and stalked by the hulking insect-like forms of Daedra. When the prisoner, this anonymous courier of fate, arrives, the city is lost. A few surviving guards, led by a desperate and unyielding captain named Savlian Matthias, are holding a broken barricade outside the city gates. The only part of the city not actively on fire is the Great Chapel of Akatosh, where a handful of survivors have barricaded the doors, their desperate prayers a thin shield against the howling chaos outside. To even reach the chapel, the prisoner has to do the impossible, charge into the Oblivion Gate, fight through Dagon's own nightmare realm, find the sigil stone at the top of its tower, and close the gate from the inside. Only then, after doing what the entire Imperial Legion had failed to do, can this nobody breach the chapel. Inside, it smelled of stale incense, cold stone, and sheer, undiluted panic. The survivors were huddled, weeping, and there, in a simple brown robe, was a priest. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a king, he was just a man, pale with fear, trying to comfort the dying. The prisoner approached him. "Martin?" The moment he saw the Amulet of Kings, the blood drained from his face. The denial, the confusion, the slow, dawning, crushing horror as he realized what it meant. He wasn't just a priest. He wasn't just the Emperor's bastard. He was the last Septim. The only Septim. The fate of the entire world, the entire covenant of Alessia, now rested on the shoulders of a man who had spent his life in quiet study, repenting for what he called a misspent youth of dabbling in Daedric magic. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. The new desperate plan was formed in the ashes of Kvatch. Get Martin to safety. Get him to Cloud Ruler Temple, the mountain fortress of the Blades. Then get him to the Imperial City, into the Temple of the One. Get the amulet around his neck, light the dragon fires, and slam the doors of Oblivion shut. It was a simple plan, and it failed immediately. The Mythic Dawn, led by Mankar Camoran, was one step ahead. They knew. They attacked Waynon Priory, where the prisoner had first met Joffrey, the Grand Master of the Blades. They slaughtered the monks, and in the chaos, they stole the Amulet of Kings. This was the checkmate. Martin was the heir, but he was an heir without a crown. He was a Dragonborn who could not prove it. He could not light the fires without the amulet. The old covenant was useless. The war effort became a two-front battle. Martin, now headquartered at Cloud Ruler Temple, began to change. The priest's robes gave way to armor. The quiet, terrified scholar found the iron spine of his ancestors. He became the leader the Blades needed, the symbol the world needed. He directed the war, sending the prisoner, now known as the hero of Kveitch, on desperate missions to close the infernal gates that were opening across the land. But the main quest, the only one that mattered, was a desperate hunt for the amulet. The hero of Kveitch had to retrieve the Mysterium Xarxes, Dagon's unholy book, and decipher it. Martin, the former Daedric dabbler, had to use his old, dark knowledge to find a way to open a portal to Mankar Camoran's personal paradise, and eventually they did. The hero stepped through a portal and into Mankar's private world. It was not a hell of fire and brimstone, it was a garden, a perfect, sun-drenched, idyllic paradise where Mankar's chosen faithful lived in eternal bliss. It was, of course, a lie. A beautiful prison where the souls of his followers were trapped, their memories wiped, their existence a hollow, perfect loop. At the centre, on a throne, sat Mankar Camoran, and around his neck gleaming was the Amulet of Kings. This is perhaps the single most debated moment in Oblivion lore. How could Mankar Camoran, a high elf, wear the Amulet of Kings? The covenant was explicit, only the bloodline of Alessia. It's a plot hole that the community has furiously tried to patch. Theory 1, he isn't wearing it. Not truly. He's using the power of the Mysterium Xarxes to force it, to suspend its divine rules. Theory 2, Mankar, as he claimed, was a Dragonborn in his own right, a state achieved through Dagon, and the amulet simply recognizes any soul of dragon kind. Theory 3, the most complex. Mankar, using his godlike power within his own realm, was performing an act of constant high-level magic. He was essentially a soul counterfeiter, actively tricking the amulet by momentarily rewriting his own soul to mimic the divine properties of the dragon blood. Whatever the truth, it was an act of supreme heretical arrogance. The hero of Kveitch cut that arrogance short. They fought Mankar, this false dragonborn, and his children. They killed him. His paradise, a reality sustained only by his will, collapsed around them. The hero snatched the Amulet of Kings and fell back into Tamriel. They had it. The key. The covenant. They raced to the Imperial City, Martin at their side. This was it. The final moment. But they were too late. The sky tore open. The mythic dawn, in a final desperate act, had sacrificed everything to shatter the last dimensional barriers. A great gaping hole of red tore over the Imperial City, and Mehrunes Dagon himself stepped through. He was a god, a 500-foot-tall, four-armed, red-skinned god of destruction. He swatted the Imperial Legion crewed battle ballistas aside like flies. He smashed the walls of the city with his bare fists. He was the apocalypse, made manifest. The plan was over. Lighting the dragonfires now was like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. A god was here. Martin, the hero, and the Blades fought a desperate running battle through the collapsing streets, trying to reach the Temple of the One. They made it. The temple was a ruin, its roof shattered. Dagon loomed over them, peering in. This was the end. Martin looked at the amulet in his hand. He looked at the god of destruction. And in that final moment, the priest, the king, the last Septim, understood. The dragonfires are not enough, he yelled. The old covenant is broken. He turned to the hero. The Amulet of Kings is a key, but not to the fires. He pushed the hero back. Run. Get out. I know what I have to do. Martin Septim, the last of the dragon blood, did not put the amulet around his neck. He raised it high, and he smashed it. This is the critical, often missed point. The Amulet of Kings wasn't just a key, it was a vessel. At its heart was the Chimel Adabal, the red diamond, said to be the crystallized blood of the dead god Lorcan, and sealed within it was the blood pact itself, the drop of Akatosh's own blood, his divine essence which he had given to Alessia. Martin didn't use the amulet. He broke it. He unleashed the divine power that had been sealed inside it for 3 eras. He was calling in the Covenant's final, nuclear option. The divine power exploded outward. Martin's mortal flesh was burned away, consumed in a column of blinding golden light. He became the avatar of Akatosh. A massive, fiery golden dragon formed of pure divine time roared in the temple. It shattered the remains of the roof and launched itself at the god of destruction. It was not a fight, it was an execution. The avatar of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, clawed and bit and burned the essence of Mehrunes Dagon. Dagon, the prince of destruction, screamed as his physical form was annihilated. The dragon avatar cast him back through the portal, back into the depths of oblivion. The sky cleared. The portal snapped shut. The world was silent. The great golden dragon reared back triumphant, and then it turned to stone. The fire went out. Its life, its purpose was spent. The hero of Kvatch heard Martin's voice whispering on the wind. The amulet is destroyed. The dragon blood is gone. The line of Septims is over, but the gates are sealed forever. Martin Septim had traded everything. He had sacrificed himself, his bloodline, and the entire Dragonborn covenant of Alessia. In its place, he had forged a new, permanent, and final barrier. The Daedric princes could never again invade Tamriel in force. The Oblivion Crisis was over. The world was saved. But the cost was absolute. The Dragonborn legacy was extinct. The Ruby Throne was empty. The Amulet of Kings was shattered. The Old Covenant was finished, not in failure, but in a final spectacular act of self-immolation. The great golden dragon that was Martin Septim turned to stone. The Covenant, forged in the blood of Alessia, was finished, traded in a single, final, glorious sacrifice that sealed the gates of oblivion forever. The Dragonborn legacy, it seemed, was over. The bloodline was extinct. The amulet was shattered. But to understand what happens next, we must understand what came before. We must rewind the chronicle. We are leaving the end of the Third Era, leaving Martin's stone monument in the ruined imperial city. We are unspooling the thread of time back, way back, before the Septims, before the Remans, even before Alessia and her slave rebellion. We are going back to the late Merethic era, back to a time when Cyrodiil was the starlit kingdom of the Aelids, and Skyrim was hell. It was the Dragon War era. In this frozen primordial time, mankind was not the master of Tamriel. The Needs and Utmorans who had settled the snowy north were not a proud, free people. They were slaves, they were cattle, they were a raw food source and a labour force for the true rulers of the world, the Dov, the dragons. The dragons were not just powerful, fire-breathing lizards. They were the children of Akatosh, the dragon god of time. They were ageless, eternal, and impossibly powerful. Their word was law, and their language, the Thu'um, was an instrument of creation itself. They were, in their own minds, minor gods, and their king, the firstborn of Akatosh, was Alduin, the World-Eater. They ruled through a cult of human servants, the dragon priests. These were the liaisons, the viceroys, the high priests of the dragon cult. In exchange for their absolute fanatical loyalty, the dragons granted them immense power. They were gifted with magical masks, artifacts of terrifying strength that warped their bodies and minds, granting them a form of lichdom, near immortality, and command over the elements. They ruled the human slave population from vast stone temples with an iron, terrifying fist. This is the entire premise of the Dragonborn DLC in the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. When the last Dragonborn arrives on the island of Solstheim, they are confronted by cultists who serve a true Dragonborn. Their master is a being who has been waiting and watching for thousands of years from a prison that is not a prison. His name is Miraak. Miraak was a dragon priest, and he wasn't just a dragon priest. He was one of the most powerful, ambitious, and arrogant priests in the entire cult. He served the dragons, he commanded their armies, he ruled from his great temple on the island of Solstheim. But for Miraak, serving was not enough. He had a thirst, not just for power, but for knowledge. And in the darkest, most secret libraries, that thirst called out to a new master. A master who was not a dragon, a master who was a Daedric prince, Hermaeus Mora, the gardener of men, the prince of knowledge and fate, that great Cthulhu-esque, eyeball and tentacle monster who hoards all the secrets that have ever been or ever will be. Hermaeus Mora saw in Miraak a perfect tool, a brilliant, powerful, arrogant mortal who was in a unique position of power. So Mora offered him a deal, a gift, forbidden knowledge. Mora showed Miraak the true nature of power. He taught him a secret, the ability to devour the soul of a dragon. This was the genesis. Miraak, through the dark pacts of Hermaeus Mora, became the first mortal to learn how to do this. He was the first Dovah-Kiin, the first Dragonborn. He confronted a dragon, and when he killed it, he did not just see a dead monster. He saw its soul, a ribbon of light and power, and he breathed it in. He absorbed its essence, its knowledge, its strength. The power was addictive. It was absolute. Why should he serve these creatures when he could consume them? Was Miraak really the first, or was he just the first to go rogue? The lore is ambiguous. The community still debates whether Miraak was born Dragonborn and Mora simply unlocked his potential, or if the pact with Mora itself made him Dragonborn, a Daedric counterfeit of Akatosh's blessing. Mankar Camoran, remember him, would have called Miraak a kindred spirit. Miraak's own claim is clear. I am the first Dragonborn. He believed his power was the original, and all others, the Septims, Alessia, were just pale imitations. His arrogance was now fueled by the souls of his former masters. He turned on them. He began a rebellion. But his wasn't a rebellion to free mankind. It was a rebellion to replace the dragons. He would be the new god king of Tamriel. He began to devour dragons one by one, his power growing with every soul. He learned, or was taught by Mora, the ultimate shout, dragon aspect, a thuum that let him physically become part dragon, his skin hardening into spectral scales. His cult of followers, who had once worshipped the dragons, now worshipped him. The dragons, led by Alduin, were furious. This was not just a rebellion, it was blasphemy. It was cannibalism. They descended on his temple on Solstheim. The dragons didn't just send their rank and file, they sent their most trusted, powerful champion, another dragon priest named Valok, the Jailer. The battle between Miraak, the first Dragonborn, and Valok, the loyalist priest, is the stuff of Solstheim legend. In-game texts like the Guardian and the Traitor describe a battle that lasted for days, a cataclysm of shouts and magic so violent that it shattered the island of Solstheim, breaking it off from the mainland of Skyrim and setting it adrift. Valok the Jailer was ultimately victorious. He struck Miraak down. Miraak was defeated. He was broken. Valok and the remaining dragons prepared for the final killing blow. But Hermaeus Mora was not about to lose his new prized possession. Just as Miraak's mortal life was about to be extinguished, a mass of black, oily tentacles and grasping books burst from the fabric of reality. Mora plucked his champion's soul from Mundus, pulling Miraak out of time and space. He saved him. Miraak woke up, not in Sovngarde, not in the Void, but in Apocrypha, the personal realm of Hermaeus Mora, a dimension of endless, towering, mouldering libraries, green-black skies, and seas of toxic ink. And there, he was trapped. He was a prisoner for ever. He was the first Dragonborn, and his hubris, his pact, had earned him an eternity of safety as the chief librarian and plaything of a Daedric prince. For thousands of years, through the entire reign of Alessia, the Remans and the Septims, Miraak waited. He paced the endless corridors of Apocrypha, reading, plotting, and seething, ruling his tiny, pathetic kingdom of ghosts and ink, waiting for a way back. He was the other Dragonborn, the first, the warning. And back in Tamriel, the dragons, having dealt with their traitor, turned their wrath back to the rest of humanity. But Miraak had proven something. He had proven that a mortal could fight a dragon. He had proven they could be killed. The spark of his selfish rebellion had, accidentally, lit a very different and much larger fire. Miraak was gone, pulled sideways into a dimension of mouldering books and black ink. His failed, selfish rebellion was over, but in his wake the world of the Nords was shattered, and the dragons were furious. They had been betrayed, not just by a human, but by a dragon priest, their most trusted servant. And this traitor had used their own magic, their own souls against them. The trust, if it ever existed, was broken. The benevolent mask of the dragon cult was cast aside, and all that remained was the iron-fisted, terrible tyranny. The oppression that followed was absolute. The dragon priests, now paranoid and cruel, doubled their demands for tribute. The dragons, led by Alduin, no longer pretended to be god-kings. They were simply masters, and humanity was a resource to be burned, eaten, or enslaved at their whim. But Miraak, in his hubris, had proven something. He had shown the world that a dragon could be killed. He had shown that a mortal could, with the voice, stand against them. His spark of selfish rebellion had, accidentally, ignited a true, desperate fire in the hearts of the enslaved Nords. A new rebellion began to smoulder. This one was different. It wasn't a play for power by a single, ambitious priest. It was a raw, desperate, and popular uprising for survival. It began in secret, in the dark of the snow-laden pines. It was whispered in mead halls and shouted in the secret valleys where the wind howled, and critically it was aided by a god. Not Akatosh, the father of their oppressors. It was Kine, the goddess of the storm, the wife of Shor, Lorcan, the one who, in Nordic myth, had breathed life into the first humans. She saw the suffering of her children, and in defiance of the dragons she gifted them, the Thuum. She didn't teach them to devour souls. She taught them to speak to the sky, to command the wind and the animals, to use the voice as a part of the natural world, not as a tool of domination. This was the start, but it was not enough. Knowing the language of the wind is useless when your enemy is the storm. The Nords needed a weapon. They needed to know the dragon's own language, their words of power, their shouts of ice and fire, and they got them from the most unlikely source imaginable. Paarthurnax. He was Alduin's brother, his lieutenant. The abjured who sat at the peak of the throat of the world, the second most powerful dragon in existence. And he was thoughtful. For an ageless, godlike being of pure domination, he had a weakness, as he would later call it. He thought. He contemplated. And in his millennia of meditation, a terrible doubt had grown. He saw Alduin. His firstborn brother was not acting as the World-Eater. This is the cosmic truth that Paarthurnax would one day share. Alduin's divine, proper role was to be the end. He was the Great Reset, the being who would consume the entire world at the end of its kalpa, or life cycle, to make way for the next. It was a terrifying but necessary job. But Alduin had abandoned his proper role. He had fallen in love with his own power. He had chosen to become a king, to preside over a world of slaves, rather than fulfill his duty as the Reaper. This, to Paarthurnax, was the greater evil. This philosophical breach was all the Nords needed. Paarthurnax, in his great moment of betrayal, defected. He taught the first human tongues, the masters of the voice, how to turn the Thuum into a weapon against dragons. He didn't just give them words, he taught them the most critical shout of all, the one that makes a dragon mortal. Dragonrend. This is the central driving mystery of the shout in Skyrim. Dragonrend has no words of power in the traditional sense. It is a shout of mortals. It does not command fire or ice or time. It commands mortality. It is a concept of pure, human, mortal finiteness, screamed into the soul of an eternal, immortal being. When a dragon is hit with Dragonrend for the first time in its existence, it understands the concept of its own death. It is forced to land, to feel its own weight, to be bound by the frailties of the earth, if only for a moment. It was the ultimate equalizer. The war began in earnest. The leaders of this new rebellion were 3 Nord heroes: Gormleth Golden Hilt, a warrior of unmatched ferocity; Hakon One-Eye, a grim, pragmatic shield brother; and Feldir the Old, a wise man, a tongue, who saw beyond the simple war to the cosmic forces at play. Even with Dragonrend, the Nords were losing. Terribly. They could ground a dragon, yes, they could kill a dragon. But for everyone they killed, 3 more descended. The dragons were numberless, ageless, and masters of a magic the Nords could barely comprehend. Alduin himself was an unstoppable force, a hurricane of shadow and flame. The war culminated in a last desperate battle on the slopes of the throat of the world. The last free armies of mankind were being slaughtered by Alduin's legions. It was the end. Gormleth, Hakon, and Feldir made their last stand. Gormleth in her fury wounded Alduin, a feat in itself, but the World-Eater was too powerful. He swatted her from the sky, her dying scream lost in the blizzard. Hakon was on his last breath, his shield shattered, Feldir the Old knew they could not kill Alduin. It was impossible. He was a force of nature, a piece of Akatosh himself. You cannot kill the end of the world, but you could make him late. Feldir the Old turned from the battle. He was carrying a bundle, an artifact of impossible power, an Elder Scroll, the Keller, a fragment of creation itself. Where did they get an Elder Scroll? The game never says. The community theorises that Paarthurnax, in his ultimate act of betrayal, not only taught them Dragonrend, but also told them where to find the one weapon that could stop his brother. Others believe that the scroll itself, being a prophetic instrument, simply allowed itself to be found. It willed its way into their hands because the event had to happen. Hakon screamed at him, "Feldir, what are you doing? We are in combat." Feldir ignored him. "I have a new shout for Alduin," he said. He unrolled the scroll. The effect was not a simple spell. The world broke. The fabric of reality, of time, was unravelled. The Elder Scroll, an instrument that both records and creates truth, was activated in the presence of Alduin, the avatar of time's end. The scroll did not cast a spell. It enforced a new reality. It targeted Alduin, this immovable object of when, and it pushed. It didn't kill him. It didn't wound him. It banished him. It grabbed his divine essence and flung him, not out of space but out of time. He was cast adrift in the great dark river of when, tumbling forward, 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 to be spat out at some future unknown date. The great black dragon, the god king of the world, simply vanished from the battle. The remaining dragons, their king and god ripped from the sky, faltered. Their invincible leader was gone. Their morale was shattered. The Nords, seeing their oppressors in disarray, let out a roar of savage primal victory. The dragon war was over. The Nords had won. But Feldir the Old, his eyes burned white from reading the scroll, knew the truth. They had not won. They had bought a chance, a reprieve. Alduin was not dead. He was just late. And he was now hurtling toward a future date. A date when, as the scroll had prophesied, the world would be broken. A date when the Septim line was gone. A date when a civil war tore Skyrim apart. A date when another soul, the Last Dragonborn, would be there, waiting. The Nords, now free, began to hunt the remaining dragons, and it was in this hunt that a new order of warriors would be born. The great black-scaled tyrant was gone, punched out of reality by a weaponized fragment of time. Alduin's shriek echoed, not in the air, but in the minds of his remaining children. Their king, their god, their invincible firstborn, had vanished. The tide of the war turned in an instant. The Nords, filled with a savage, desperate joy, roared and charged. The dragons, for the first time in their eternal lives, knew panic. Their command structure was gone. Their god was silent. They scattered to the winds, fleeing to the highest, most inaccessible peaks of Tamriel. The dragon war was over, but the dragon hunt had just begun. The Nords, masters of the Thuum, became the ultimate predators. They hunted the dragons for sport, for revenge, and for power. The greatest of the tongues, the heroes who had fought with Feldir and Hakon, began to systematically exterminate the Dov from Skyrim. A few of the wiser dragons, like Paarthurnax, went into permanent quiet seclusion on the throat of the world. Others, like the cunning Oblivion, simply waited, flying so high and so far that they were more myth than menace. But for most, their age of dominion was over, replaced by an age of being hunted. And as the Nords consolidated their new, free kingdom, a very different story was playing out on a different continent. We must turn our gaze far to the east, across the vast, storm-racked Padomaic Ocean, to the continent of Akavir, the Dragon Land. Akavir is a place of mystery, a land of bizarre and hostile cultures. It is not home to men, mer, or beast folk as we know them. It is the land of the Kamal, snow demons, the Tang Mo, monkey people, and the Karpo Tun, tiger dragons. And, most infamously, it is the homeland of the Chaisi, the snake men. We call them snake men, but the reality is more unsettling. Texts are vague. Are they humanoid, with serpentine features and scales? Or are they, as some forbidden lore suggests, creatures with a human-like torso and a long serpentine tail in place of legs? We don't know. We only know they are immortal, beautiful, terrible, and golden-scaled. And like the Nords, their entire culture was centered on dragons, but the Saishi of Akavir did not worship dragons. They hunted them, and they did not just kill them. According to the in-game text Mysterious Akavir, the Saishi ate all the dragons of their continent. What this means is a source of chilling speculation. Is ate a metaphor for a great war, or is it literal? Did these golden-scaled vampire snake folk, as they are sometimes called, literally consume the flesh and souls of the dragons of Akavir, perhaps absorbing their power in a twisted predatory version of the Dragonborn blessing? Whatever the truth, the result was a cultural paradox. The Saishi had successfully exterminated the very creature that was the centre of their society. They were a nation of dragon hunters, with no dragons left to hunt. They were adrift. Culture built on a foundation that it had itself devoured. So they turned their golden eyes west, across the ocean, to Tamriel, a land where, they had heard, the Dove still ruled the skies. In the First Era, long after the Nords had won their freedom, the Saishi invaded Tamriel. They landed in the north near Pale Pass and began a systematic bloody march south. They cut through the fledgling kingdoms of Men and Mer. They were not, it seemed, interested in conquest. They weren't taking territory or building forts or enslaving the populace. They were just looking. They were killing, yes, but it was a cold, efficient, almost investigative kind of slaughter. This brings us back to one of the greatest theories in the lore. Was the Saishi invasion ever an invasion, or was it, as many suspect, a desperate generations-long armed pilgrimage? Was it a crusade? The Saishi, having eaten their own dragons, had become obsessed with them. They were a culture defined by the dragon, and they were seeking a new one to serve. They were, perhaps, looking for the ultimate dragon, the Dovah-Kiin. They were looking for a Dragonborn. They cut their way through Skyrim, finding only Nords who could shout but none of the true blood. They marched south into Cyrodiil, which was, at this time, shattered by the interregnum between the Alessian and Reman empires, and there, at Pale Pass, as we have heard, they met the warlord Reman Cyrodiil. He rallied the human armies for a last stand. He was preparing to die, and he gave a speech. And in that speech, his voice changed. The power of the Thu'um, the soul of a dragon, roared from his throat. The Saishi vanguard, these immortal golden-scaled killers, stopped. They stared, and they listened. They had found him. They had crossed an ocean, fought for decades, slaughtered thousands, and they had found him. Their crusade was over. The Saishi generals threw down their daikatanas. They prostrated themselves in the mud and snow. They had found their god king. This is the birth of the organization we know as the Blades. The Saishi invaders, in a single moment, became the most fanatically loyal soldiers in Reman's army. They called him the Dragonborn, and they formed his personal elite bodyguard, the Dragon Guard. Their purpose, their religion, was now to serve and protect the living Dragonborn. This is their origin. They were not an imperial organization. They were an Akaviri one, grafted onto the heart of the new empire. They served the Reman dynasty for generations, with a loyalty that was absolute and terrifying. They built Cloud Ruler Temple, their fortress monastery high in the Geril Mountains, a piece of Akavir carved into the stone of Cyrodiil. When the last Reman emperor was assassinated by the Akaviri potentate Versidue Shai, a Saishi who, ironically, did not share their fanatical devotion to the dragon blood, the Dragon Guard was shattered. Their purpose was gone. Their god was dead. They went underground. They disbanded, or seemed to, but they didn't stop. Their mission just changed. They were no longer just bodyguards. They became watchers. They became an intelligence agency, a secret society dedicated to finding and restoring a Dragonborn to the throne. When Yalti Earlybeard, Tiber Septim, shouted his way to power, they saw him. They tested him. And when he wore the Amulet of Kings, they knew. They re-emerged from the shadows and offered him their swords. Tiber Septim, being the ruthless pragmatist he was, accepted. He rechartered them. They were no longer the Dragon Guard, a personal cult-like bodyguard. They were now the blades, the eyes, ears, and hidden daggers of the Septim Empire. But the Blades, especially their leadership, never forgot their true purpose. They were not just spies. They were lawmasters. They were the keepers of the Covenant. They were the ones who remembered the Dragon War. They were the ones who studied the prophecy of Alduin's return. They built Skyhaven Temple in Skyrim, a shrine and an outpost, a place to record their sacred duty. On its great carved stone wall, Alduin's Wall, they recorded the entire history, the Dragon War, the banishment via the Elder Scroll, the prophecy that Alduin would return, and that when he did, he would be defeated, not by an army, but by one final Dovah-Kiin, the Last Dragonborn. Their mission, which had begun as a hunt in Akavir, which had become a crusade, which had transformed into a bodyguard's vow, now had its final ultimate purpose: find the Last Dragonborn, guide them, protect them, and prepare them for the final fated battle with the World-Eater. This was their sacred trust. This was the vow they kept, in secret, through the entire Septim Dynasty. And when Uriel VII and Martin Septim died, and the dragon bloodline of emperors was extinguished, the Blades were the only ones who knew the other legacy was still out there. They were the only ones who, in the dark days of the Fourth Era, hunted by the Thalmor, their temples sacked, their order broken, were still watching the skies, waiting. The great stone dragon, the final silent monument to Martin Septim, stood in the ruins of the imperial city's temple. The Oblivion Crisis was over. The world was saved. The world was also shattered. The Dragon Blood Covenant, the very bedrock of the Third Era, was gone. Martin's sacrifice wasn't a renewal of the pact. It was a final, spectacular cancellation. He had traded the entire Septim legacy to forge a new, permanent barrier between Mundus and Oblivion. The gates were sealed for good, but in doing so, he had broken the Ruby Throne. The political and spiritual implications were catastrophic. The Emperor had always ruled by divine right, a right proven by the Amulet of Kings. Now, the amulet was a cloud of vaporized atoms and the divine bloodline was extinct. Who, now, had the right to rule? The answer, it turned out, was nobody and everybody. The Third Era limped to a close and the Fourth Era began, not with a coronation, but with a street brawl. The Septim Empire, a body held together for 4 centuries by a divine spine, collapsed into a heap. The High Chancellor, a man named Okato, tried to hold the pieces together, but he was a bureaucrat, not a god king. He was eventually assassinated, and the central government of Tamriel simply dissolved. It was the interregnum all over again, warlords, chaos, and opportunity. In the Somerset Isles, the High Elves, the Aldmeri, had watched the Oblivion Crisis with a very different eye. They saw the collapse of the Septim line not as a tragedy, but as a correction, a return to the natural order. And in this power vacuum, a new, extremist political party, the Thalmor, seized control. The Thalmor were not just elven supremacists, they were human-hating theological purists. They believed that men were an abomination, a blight on the world, and that their god, Tiber Septim, was the ultimate heresy. The Thalmor blamed the hubris of man for the Oblivion Crisis. They then staged a magical coup of their own. They claimed, loudly and publicly, that they were the ones who had ended the crisis, using their own deep racial magic to stabilize the world. It was a complete, audacious lie, but the world was broken and looking for a savior, and the Thalmor looked the part. They used this lie to consolidate their power, reforming the Aldmeri dominion and bringing the Khajiit and the unwilling Bosmer under their golden boot. The new, weakened and leaderless empire in Cyrodiil, now held together by a Colovian warlord named Titus Meda That, who founded the new non-Dragonborn Mede dynasty, was no match. The Aldmeri dominion declared war. The Great War was a curb-stomping. The Aldmeri legions, magically superior and driven by a fanatical ideology, marched across Tamriel. They sacked the imperial city, committing atrocities that made the Oblivion Crisis look, well, slightly more organised. The Empire, bleeding, broken, and desperate, sued for peace. The Thalmor, standing on the steps of the White Gold Tower, offered one. It was called the White Gold Concordat. It was a total humiliating surrender. But one clause buried in the terms was the real poison. It wasn't about land or gold. It was about theology. The Empire was forced to outlaw the worship of Talos. This was the true goal. The Thalmor could not stand the idea of Tiber Septim, the man who had conquered them with a giant brass robot, being worshipped as a god. It was a racial, spiritual, and historical insult. They were, in effect, trying to unmake the Ninth Divine by force of law, and as part of this they demanded one other thing: the complete, total, and permanent disbanding of the Blades. Why the Blades? Because the Thalmor knew their history. They knew the Blades weren't just spies, they were the keepers of the Dragonborn Covenant. They were the fanatical bodyguard of the Septim Dynasty. But more than that, they were the sworn servants of Tiber Septim. They were the living, breathing memory of Talos, and the Thalmor wanted that memory erased. Justicia agents were dispatched to hunt down and decommission every Blade, active or retired, in the world. This brings us to the Blades we meet in Skyrim, to Delphine, the paranoid innkeeper, to Esbern, the rambling, terrified archivist hiding in a sewer. They are the last. They are the hunted, broken survivors of an order whose original purpose, protect the Emperor, is gone. And what about their other purpose? Their original purpose? The one carved into Alduin's wall in Skyhaven Temple, the prophecy. When the world is broken, when the dragon bloodline is gone, Alduin will return. Delphine, Esbern, the last remnants of the Dragon Guard, had spent their lives watching the portents, and now they were living in them. The world was broken. The Empire was a puppet of the Thalmor. The line of Septims was extinct, and in Skyrim, the heartland of Talos, the Talisman had split the country in two. A charismatic Nord Jarl, Ulfric Stormcloak, a man who, ironically, could also shout after studying with the Greybeards, had murdered the High King of Skyrim with the voice in what he claimed was a traditional duel. He had sparked the Stormcloak Rebellion. This is the central, dark theory of the Fourth Era. Did the Thalmor want the Civil War? The in-game Thalmor dossier on Ulfric Stormcloak proves they did. They saw him as an asset. They didn't help him, but they didn't stop him. They wanted the war to drag on, to bleed both the Stormcloaks and the Empire, to keep mankind weak and divided. But the theory goes deeper. Did the Thalmor know about Alduin's wall? Did they know Alduin was prophesied to return when the world was broken? Many believe the Thalmor's ultimate goal wasn't just rule, but unmaking. They are elves. They remember a time before the prison of Mundus, when they were divine spirits. They hate Lorcan's creation. By breaking the Empire, by banning Talos, by fomenting a world-breaking civil war, were they intentionally trying to trigger the prophecy? Were they trying to summon the World-Eater, to get him to do his job and unmake the world of men? We don't know. All we know is that the world was perfectly, horribly primed. It was the 17th of last seed in the year 4E201. The world was at war. The gods were silent, the covenant was broken, the last of the Blades were in hiding. And Alduin, the World-Eater, who had been tumbling through the dark currents of time for 4 millennia, was about to land. The prophecy was no longer a prophecy, it was a weather report, and the storm was here. All it needed was a spark and a victim. The world was primed, the prophecy was a ticking clock, and the time was 4E201. The 17th of last seed. A cold, grey, miserable morning in the Gerald Mountains. It begins, as so many grim stories do, on a cart. A rickety, uncomfortable prison cart, its wooden wheels grinding in the muddy ruts of the road. The air smells of damp pine, nervous sweat, and the sour stink of unwashed men. And on this cart a prisoner, an anonymous face, a literal nobody. They are not a hero, they are not a chosen one, they are just there. Caught crossing the border, swept up in an imperial ambush of the very man sitting across from them, Ulfric Stormcloak, the Jarl of Windhelm, the leader of the rebellion, bound and gagged, but his eyes still burning with a cold blue fire. The destination is Helgen, a small, unremarkable timber fort now repurposed for a single, momentous event. This is to be the end of the Stormcloak rebellion. General Tullius, the imperial general, is there to oversee it. And watching from a balcony, with a cold elven detachment, is Elenwen, the Thalmor ambassador, there to ensure her allies in the Empire do exactly as the Concordat demands. This isn't an execution, it's a political statement. The prisoner is processed. A soldier holding a list calls out the names: Ulfric Stormcloak, Rylaf of Riverwood, and you. Wait, the soldier, Hadvar says. You're not on the list. This is the moment, the pivot point. The prisoner's entire existence, their hero's journey, is at the mercy of imperial bureaucracy. The captain is impatient, the general is waiting, the Thalmor are watching. Forget the list, she snaps. He goes to the block. And that's it. The prisoner's life is to be ended not for a crime, but for convenience. It's just tidier that way. We wouldn't want to spoil the big, important execution with a lot of leftover paperwork now, would we? The priest of Arche begins the last rites. He's interrupted. A Stormcloak in a final act of defiance walks to the block. The thud of the axe is a wet, final sound, and then it's the prisoner's turn. They are forced to their knees. Their head is pushed down onto the cold, blood-slick wood. The executioner, his arms thick, his axe heavy, moves into position. The prisoner sees the fibres of the wood, the basket for their head, the boots of General Tullius. This is it, the end of a story that never even got to begin. And then a sound that does not belong, a sound that has not been heard in Tamriel for thousands of years, a deep, echoing, tearing roar that seems to come, not from a creature, but from the sky itself. "What in Oblivion is that?" mutters a soldier. General Tullius, a man of iron practicality, is annoyed. "It's nothing, carry on." But the executioner looking up has frozen. This is the great cosmic joke of the Elder Scrolls V. The player, the Last Dragonborn, is saved from death, not by a god, not by a heroic rescue, but by the literal, main antagonist god of destruction. Alduin the World-Eater lands on the executioner's tower. The force of his landing, a Dovah landing on a mortal structure, throws the executioner off balance. The axe meant for the prisoner's neck swings wild. In the next second, the prisoner would have been dead. The World-Eater, the great nemesis, saves his nemesis's life by accident. He is a hurricane of black scales, shadow and malice. He is not a dragon, he is the dragon, and he unleashes his voice. But this isn't the Yoltur Shul, the fire inferno sun that we come to know. It's something else. The sky turns a sickly orange-green, and from that sky, Alduin calls down a storm of meteors. He is pulling rocks from the heavens and throwing them at a backwater timber fort. It is the definition of overkill, and it is glorious. Helgen explodes. What follows is not a battle, it's a rout. It's a scramble for survival. The prisoner, unbound in the chaos, is just another terrified refugee. They follow Ralof, the Stormcloak or Hadvar, the Imperial soldier, into the keep. It doesn't matter. They're all just prey. Alduin's voice is everywhere. He's speaking, not just roaring. In the dragon tongue, he is taunting them. "Palok Jor!" he bellows. "Meyesuta vunneu sunal!" Arrogant mortals, your weak-bodiedness is no match for me. He is enjoying this. This is a cat playing with its food. The prisoner and their temporary ally, Hadvar or Ralof, flee through the burning keep, through the torture chambers, because of course the Imperials have a torture chamber, it's probably standard issue, and into the caves beneath. They emerge into the quiet snowy woods miles away. Helgen is a pillar of smoke behind them. The prisoner is free, a refugee, an escapee. Their companion suggests splitting up. Hadvar asks the prisoner to go to Riverwood to warn them, and then on to Whiterun to warn the Jarl Balgruuf the Greater. The prisoner, who began the day as a nobody on a death list, is now a courier. They do. They travel to the great windy city of Whiterun, built around the giant dead tree. They warn the Jarl. Balgruuf, a practical Nord, a man caught between the Empire and the Stormcloaks, is skeptical. A dragon? Like in the stories? But he takes the threat seriously. He sends a contingent of guards led by his housecarl Irileth to the western watchtower, which has just sent up a smoke signal, and he asks the prisoner, this witness, to come along. The prisoner arrives at the watchtower. It's a ruin, smashed, burned. And then, it appears, a great bronze-scaled dragon. This dragon's name is Mirmulnir, which translates to Allegiant Stronghunt, and he talks. Crucially, he is one of the few dragons in the entire game who was not resurrected by Alduin. He was one of the originals. He survived the Dragon War, survived the Blade's purges, and had been hiding in seclusion, presumed dead, for thousands of years. Alduin's return had been the clarion call that brought him out of hiding. He is, in effect, the first loyalist to answer the summons. The fight is desperate. The Whiterun guards are brave and they are dying. Arrows, swords. The prisoner, using whatever they can, attacks. And finally the dragon falls. It crashes to the ground, its body a great scaled mountain. The guards gather. Is it dead? And then it happens. The dragon's flesh begins to burn, not with fire, but with a white spectral light. It peels away, dissolving into ash. Its very essence, its soul, tears free from its body, a rushing, roaring torrent of light and sound and power, and it slams into the prisoner. The prisoner's vision whites out. They are filled with a roaring, a feeling of knowledge. They know things, words, yol, fire. They feel stronger. The guards are staring, their weapons are lowered, their faces are a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated awe. He absorbed it, one of them stammers, just like in the old stories. And as if on cue, a new sound. A great, thundering, booming voice, not from one man, but from many, shouting in perfect, impossible unison. It rolls down from the throat of the world, from High Hrothgar, the highest peak in Tamriel. Dovah-Kiin! The debate. Why did Mimilnir attack that specific watchtower? It seems random, but Alduin is arrogant, not stupid. He knew he'd been seen at Helgen by a survivor. He'd heard the old legends. Was Mimilnir's attack a random act of a dragon off the leash? Or was it a test? Was he sent by Alduin to this populated area to draw out any potential Dragonborn, to see if the old nagging prophecy was actually true? He was probing the field, and in doing so he confirmed his own worst fear. The prisoner, the nobody, the name not on a list, the convenient execution, the refugee, the courier, now had a title that had not been heard in the world since the death of Martin Septim, a title that the Blades had been waiting for, a title that the Greybeards were now shouting from the top of the world. Dragonborn. The legacy was not dead. It had just been sleeping, and it was no longer the blood of an emperor. It was the soul of a killer. The dragon's soul was a roaring, white-hot torrent, a hurricane of knowledge and power that slammed into the prisoner's very essence. The guards of Whiterun stared, their faces a mask of slack-jawed, primal awe. They didn't just see a hero, they saw a myth. They saw the living, breathing proof of their oldest, most sacred legends. And as if to punctuate the moment, the world itself spoke. A great, thundering, booming chorus of voices, not a sound in the air but a sound of the air, rolled down from the highest cloud-wreathed peak in Tamriel. From the throat of the world, the home of the gods, came the shout, Dovah-Kiin! It was a summons, it was a confirmation. The Greybeards, the masters of the voice, the most reclusive and powerful beings in Skyrim were calling. The Jarl of Whiterun, Belgruf, who had moments before been a sceptical politician, was now a true believer. The Greybeards, he breathed. Not since Tiber Septim himself have they called a man. You are Dragonborn. You must go to High Hrothgar. And so began the true pilgrimage. The journey to Riverwood was a courier's errand. The journey to Whiterun was a soldier's duty. The journey up the 7,000 steps was an act of faith. It was a brutal, soul-crushing climb. The steps were carved into the very stone of the mountain, slick with ice, lashed by a wind that didn't just chill the bone, but seemed to want to peel the flesh from it. This was the path of pilgrims, and the prisoner saw them on the way, old Nords, young Nords, kneeling at each of the small carved emblems that told the history of the Way of the Voice. They were praying. The prisoner, however, was climbing, and the mountain tested them. Halfway up, where the air thinned and the world was just a swirl of grey cloud and white snow, a new horror emerged, the Frost Troll. A great three-eyed, white-furred monster that guarded the path. It was a filter. It was the mountain's way of asking, "Are you sure you belong here?" Any Skyrim player to this day will get a small, involuntary shiver when they remember their first climb. That frost troll on the 7,000 steps is a legendary gatekeeper. Most players, at this low level, are not prepared. They are a person in basic iron armour with a simple steel sword. The troll's regenerative health and bone-crushing strength-enhanced fists. Well, let's just say it taught an entire generation of Dragonborn the value of running past it very, very fast, or a tactical retreat, all the way back to Ivarstead to buy more potions. But the prisoner, the Dragonborn, made it. They pushed past the troll through the blizzards and finally into the quiet, wind-scoured courtyard of High Hrothgar. It was not a castle, It was a monastery, a place of absolute crushing silence. Inside, 4 old men in simple grey robes stood waiting in a great, vaulted hall. They did not move. They just watched. Their leader, Arngir, stepped forward. He was the only one who would speak, for as he explained, the voices of the other 3, Bori, Einarth and Wulfgar, were too powerful. To even speak in the common tongue would be to shatter the stone and the mind. They spoke only in the dragon tongue, or not at all. This was the way of the voice, a philosophy of absolute meditative restraint. Arnir explained that the Thuum, the voice, was not a weapon. It was a tool of worship, a way to honour the goddess Kine, the creator of men. To use it for simple, worldly things like war or shouting bandits off cliffs was a blasphemy, a path of blood and thunder that had led the old tongues to ruin. They were, in essence, divine pacifists, and they were deeply, deeply conflicted. Because here, standing in front of them was the Dovah-Kiin, a being whose entire purpose, whose very soul, was built to kill dragons, to use the voice as the ultimate weapon. The prophecy they had guarded for 4,000 years was now standing in their meditation hall, and it was a walking contradiction to their entire faith. But they were bound by that same prophecy. They had to test this stranger. Arngir asked the Dragonborn to shout, to prove they truly had the soul. The Dragonborn, having only the one word, Fuse, force, yelled it. A tiny flicker of energy pushed forward. The Greybeards were not impressed. Arngir gave the Dragonborn a new word, Ro, meaning balance. The Dragonborn soul drank it in, knowing it instantly. They were then asked to shout at the Greybeards. The Dragonborn did. Fuss. Row. The 2 words, a small controlled push of force hit the 4 old men, and then, in perfect shattering unison, all 4 Greybeards roared back. Row! Da! Balance. Push. It was not a shout. It was a god clearing his throat. The world vibrated. The stone walls of the monastery groaned. The very air turned to a physical, solid thing that slammed into the Dragonborn, blurring their vision, shaking their bones, and nearly knocking them from their feet. In that one terrifying second, they had made their point. This is what true mastery of the voice looks. This is the power we hold back, every single second of every single day. They had accepted the Dragonborn. The final trial, they explained, was to retrieve the horn of Jurgen Windcaller, the founder of their order, from his tomb in the Barrow of Ustengrav. Who was Jurgen Windcaller? Arngir explains. He was one of the greatest of the original tongues from the Dragon War. He was a man of blood and thunder, a warrior who used his voice to swallow the battle shouts of a whole regiment. But he was defeated. He led an army against the Dwemer, and when he and his tongues shouted, the Dwemer, those masters of tonal architecture and sound magic, were unmoved. Their music simply undid the shouts. Humbled and defeated, Jurgen meditated for 7 years, and in that time he formulated the new philosophy, the way of the voice. He realized that true power did not come from using the voice, but from restraining it. The Dragonborn, now a formal acolyte, travelled to the bleak, marshy tomb of Ustengrav. They fought their way through legions of Draugr, through skeletal remains and fire traps. They solved the ancient Nordic puzzles. They arrived at the final grand burial chamber, the coffin, and nothing. The pedestal where the horn was meant to be was empty. In its place was a single, small, folded note, a note written in a modern common script. It read simply, Dragonborn, I need to speak to you. Rent the attic room at the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood. Ask for a friend. This was not a trial. This was a setup. The Dragonborn travelled back to Riverwood, the first sleepy town they had entered. They went to the inn. They spoke to the innkeeper, Delphine. I'm here to rent the attic room, the Dragonborn said, giving the code. Delphine's entire demeanour, the friendly, bustling innkeeper, vanished. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, and deeply paranoid stare. Oh, you are you? Follow me. She led them, not to the attic, but to a small private room, and then she opened a secret passage, hidden behind a false wardrobe. Downstairs, in a hidden basement, was a map of Tamriel covered in pins, a table of weapons, and a strange curved sword on the wall. "I took the horn," Delphine said. "I had to know if you were really Dragonborn, or if you were just loud." She gave them the horn. "The Greybeards were a test. I'm the real test. I'm one of the last of the blades." This is the moment the game's central, unresolvable and brilliant conflict begins, the Greybeards versus the Blades. The community is to this day fiercely divided. Are the Greybeards, as Delphine claims, cowardly old fools, hiding on a mountain, practicing their shouts while the world burns? Are they naive pacifists, blinded by their philosophy, failing to act? Or are the Blades, as the Greybeards would argue, paranoid, genocidal relics? Are they so trapped in their past, dragon hunting, that they are blind to the present, that Paarthurnax, their master, redeemed himself and helped mankind? The game forces the Dragonborn to walk this tightrope. It is a clash between philosophy, the Greybeards' way of the voice, and duty, the Blades' ancient Akaviri vow to kill dragons. Delphine, the ultimate pragmatist, was not interested in meditation. She was interested in action. The Greybeards wanted the Dragonborn to study. Delphine wanted them to hunt. She had a lead. The dragons weren't just returning. She had seen it with her own eyes. They were being resurrected. "I followed the rumours," she said, her voice a low, grim whisper. "I went to a dragon burial mound near Kynesgrove, and I saw it. I saw him, Alduin. He was there. He spoke a word, and the dragon, it came back to life right out of the ground." She pointed to the map. "I know where he's going next. Kynesgrove, and you're going to be there too. It's time to stop talking about dragons and start killing them." The summons of the Greybeards had been a test of faith. The revelation from Delphine was a call to arms. The Dragonborn, now walking a tightrope between the pacifist monks and the paranoid spies, followed Delphine's grim directive. They travelled to the woods near Kynesgrove and they watched. They did not have to wait long. A great black shadow blotted out the sun. Alduin descended. He was not there to fight. He landed on the ancient grass-covered burial mound, and he shouted, "Saloknir Zigrovonun Sund. Saloknir, your soul is bound to me on earth." The very ground trembled. Dirt and stones exploded upward as, with a skeletal clatter, a dragon's skeleton clawed its way out of the ancient earth. Alduin roared again, and a flash of red, unholy light washed over the bones. Flesh, scales, and sinew regrew in an instant, a grotesque, fast-motion replay of creation. Saloknir, a dragon dead for 4,000 years, was alive again. Alduin saw the Dragonborn. He sneered. He called them Dovah-Kiin, yes, but with a voice dripping in contempt. Then, his work done, he launched himself into the sky and vanished, leaving his newly risen lieutenant to test this mortal. The test failed. The Dragonborn, with the help of Delphine, killed Saloknir. And for the second time, the prisoner from Helgen drank a dragon's soul. Delphine was now a fanatic. She was 100% convinced. This was the last Dragonborn of the prophecy. But she was just one blade. She needed the other half of her fractured order. Esbern, the archivist, the lawkeeper, the man who knew the prophecy. Finding him was not easy. Esbern, hunted by the Thalmor for decades, was not hiding in a university. He was hiding in the Ratway, the stinking, feces-clogged, criminal-infested sewer tunnels beneath the city of Riften. The Dragonborn had to fight their way through skeever-infested tunnels and paranoid, hostile gutter kings just to find the old man, who was cowering behind a multi-locked steel door, convinced you were a Thalmor agent. After a desperate flight from the Thalmor, who had of course been tipped off, the Dragonborn reunited the last two blades, Delphine the sword and Esbern the shield, at Skyhaven Temple. This was their hidden sanctuary, an ancient Akaviri fortress carved into the rock, the home of the original Dragon Guard, and inside was their crown jewel, Alduin's Wall. This is the single most important piece of prophecy in the game. Alduin's Wall is a massive carved stone mural that tells the entire story. It depicts the Dragon War. It shows the ancient Nords being oppressed. It shows them learning to shout from Paarthurnax. And critically, it shows the end of the war. It shows the three ancient tongues, Gormla, Haken and Feldir, using an Elder Scroll to not kill Alduin, but banish him. And it showed the weapon they used to ground him, a unique shout. A shout Esbern identified as Dragonrend. Here was the plan, but it had a fatal flaw. No one knew Dragonrend. It wasn't a word of power learned from a wall. It was a mortal invention, a concept of hatred and mortality screamed at an immortal. It was lost to time. The Dragonborn was forced to return to the Greybeards, to Arngeir. The old monk was disgusted. The blood-soaked blades were back, and they had, in his eyes, already corrupted the Dragonborn. But he was bound by his duty. He did not know the shout, but he knew who did, or at least who was there. "There is another," Arngeir sighed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Our master, the one who lives at the peak, at the throat of the world. He has not spoken to a mortal since Tiber Septim. His name is Paarthurnax." The Dragonborn climbed the final blizzard-racked path to the very summit of Skyrim, and there, perched on the Time Wound, a place where reality itself was thinner, was a dragon. An ancient, grey-scaled, tattered-winged, bearded dragon. He was meditating. It was Paarthurnax, Alduin's brother, the one who had betrayed his own kind. He confirmed the story. He did not know Dragonrend, but he offered a new, insane, brilliant solution. The ancient tongues. They did not know, he mused. They created. Why ask me, when you can ask them? Here, at the Time Wold. This is where they cast my brother adrift. The Keller. The Elder Scroll, its memory is strong here. If you had the scroll, you could look back. You could see the moment it happened. You could learn. What followed was a descent into madness, a quest to find an Elder Scroll. It led the Dragonborn to the frozen north, to a half-mad hermit scholar named Septimus Cygnus, who was living in an ice cave, obsessed with a giant glowing Dwemer lockbox. This hermit, it turned out, was a servant of another master, Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge. The Dragonborn, in a deal that would have dire consequences, navigated the ancient soul-crushing Dwemer ruin of Blackreach and retrieved the scroll. They returned to the throat of the world. They stood on the Time Wound. They unrolled the ancient, impossible artifact, and the world ended. Their vision went white. They were gone. They were there, 4,000 years in the past. They were a ghost, an observer, watching the three heroes Gormleth, Hakon and Feldir make their final desperate stand against a living, breathing, furious Alduin. They heard the words, they saw the shout, and by seeing it, the Dragonborn's soul learned it. The vision faded. The Dragonborn was back in the present, and Alduin, drawn by the scent of the Elder Scroll, was there. The Dragonborn, flanked by the ancient repentant Paarthurnax, fought the World-Eater. They unleashed Dragonrend. The shout struck Alduin, and for the first time the god-dragon recoiled. He was forced to land. He was mortal. They defeated him. They broke him. But he did not die. His soul did not tear free. Battered, humiliated and enraged, Alduin roared in defiance and fled. He had fled, as Paarthurnax explained, to Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife. He was not just hiding, he was feasting. He had found the Hall of Valor and cast a soul-snaring fog over the afterlife, and he was devouring the souls of the dead heroes, rebuilding his power. Alduin's main fortress, Skuldafn, was his access point to Sovngarde. This was a piece of brilliant military strategy by the dragon cult. Skuldafn was a mountaintop fortress, accessible only by flight. It was impossible to besiege. It was the perfect, unassailable bastion, and the Dragonborn's only way in. The Dragonborn had to trap a dragon in Dragon's Reach. After forcing a truce in the Civil War, a story for another night, Jarl Balgruuf agreed. They trapped the cunning Odavieng, and Odavieng, respecting the power of the Dovah-Kiin who had outsmarted him, agreed to fly them to Skuldafn. The Dragonborn, a one-person army, stormed the fortress, defeated the dragon priest Nukhreen, and stepped through the portal. They arrived in Sovngarde, a beautiful, misty, vibrant afterlife that was being eaten. They met the three original heroes, Gormleth, Hakon and Feldir, who were waiting for them. Together, the four of them, the ancient and the new, shouted the fog away and challenged Alduin for the final time. The battle was cosmic. It was epic, and Alduin was at last destroyed. But his soul, it shattered. It was not absorbed. It dissolved, screamed, and vanished. The community has always debated this. Why didn't we get Alduin's soul? The most prevalent theory is that the Dragonborn's job was not to kill the World-Eater, it was to kill the tyrant. Alduin's true purpose, to end the world at the proper time, is a divine mandate from Akatosh. The Dragonborn's job was simply to stop this practice run, this arrogant attempt at ruling. When Alduin was killed, his divine essence was simply recalled by Akatosh, to be put back on the shelf until the real apocalypse is scheduled. The cosmic tyrant was gone, the prophecy was fulfilled. But Alduin was not the only tyrant, he was not the only true Dragonborn. Back in Skyrim, the Dragonborn was attacked by masked robed figures, cultists. They hissed that the Dragonborn was false, that the true Dragonborn, Miraak, was returning. This was a name from a forgotten age. Miraak, the first Dragonborn, the traitor priest who had been trapped in Apocrypha by Hermaeus Mora. The Dragonborn followed the trail to the island of Solstheim. They found a populace enslaved, chanting, building strange tentacle-like shrines in their sleep. They found the Temple of Miraak. They read a black book, and they were pulled into Apocrypha. They met him, Miraak the First. He was arrogant, powerful, and bitter. He had been waiting, plotting his escape for 4,000 years. And now, by stealing the souls of the dragons this Dragonborn killed, he was almost strong enough. What followed was a parallel war, a war for the title of Dragonborn. The last Dragonborn was forced to do what Miraak had done, traffic with Hermaeus Mora. The Daedric Prince, that great gurgling mass of eyeballs and tentacles, saw the last Dragonborn as an upgrade. Miraak was a rebellious, disappointing servant. This one was potent. Mora forced the Dragonborn to gather the Black Books, to learn the secrets of Apocrypha, to learn the bend-will shout that Miraak had used to enslave the island. The final confrontation was not in a glorious afterlife. It was on a dark, shifting, ink-stained pinnacle at the centre of a Daedric realm. It was a true duel of Dovah-Kiin. They shouted, they used dragon aspect. They fought, two souls of the dragon tearing reality apart. The last Dragonborn was stronger. Miraak, defeated, tried to flee, to absorb a dragon's soul to heal. But Hermaeus Mora had seen enough. Miraak, the prince gurgled, you have been disappointing. A great, oily, black tentacle impaled the first Dragonborn. As Miraak died, his body turning to ash, he looked at his rival. May he reward you, as he rewarded me. And then, Miraak's soul, and the hundreds of dragon souls he had consumed over the millennia, tore free, and slammed into the last Dragonborn. It was an explosion of power unlike anything imaginable. The last Dragonborn was now, unquestionably, the most powerful Dovah-Kiin to have ever lived. Hermaeus Mora was pleased. He had his new champion. The Dragonborn, their destiny fulfilled, their rival absorbed, was now the heir to two legacies: the heroic destiny of Alduin's Bane and the dark, trapped servitude of Miraak's. The World-Eater was gone, his divine essence scattered, recalled to the heavens to await the true final end of time. The first Dragonborn was dead, his soul, and the hundreds of souls he had hoarded, consumed, a final, explosive inheritance of power. The prophecies were fulfilled, the tyrants were dead, the world was saved, and the last Dragonborn, the prisoner from Helgen, now stood as, quite possibly, the most powerful mortal being in the history of Tamriel. They were a walking paradox, a being with the soul of a dragon, the knowledge of Hermaeus Mora's darkest library, the martial prowess of the companions, the arcane mastery of the College of Winterhold, the shadows of the Thieves' Guild, and the blood-soaked blessings of the Dark Brotherhood. They could shout reality into submission. They could command the remaining dragons to land with a whisper. They were the undisputed champion of multiple Daedric princes. And what now? This is the final, unwritten chapter of the Dragonborn legacy. It is the question that haunts the chronicle. The world was saved, but it was not healed. The civil war still raged, a bloody, pointless wound that tore Skyrim apart. The Thalmor, those golden-skinned, black-hearted zealots, were still pulling the strings, their victory in the Great War secure, their agents hunting for any new heresy. The last Dragonborn, this godlike being, returned to a world of petty mortal problems. they were immediately faced with a final agonizing choice, one that would define their entire legacy. Delphine, the pragmatic, paranoid blade, gave the final order. The Blade's oath, their Akaviri origin, their entire purpose was to hunt dragons, and one remained, the first one, the one who had betrayed his kind for mankind. Paarthurnax must die, she declared. He was Alduin's lieutenant. He committed atrocities. Justice must be done. The Greybeards through Arngir were just as adamant. To kill Paarthurnax, he warned, is to betray the very way of the voice. He is our master. He is the living symbol of redemption, of overcoming one's evil nature. To kill him is to prove you have learned nothing. This was the final test. What was the Dragonborn legacy for? Was it the legacy of the blades, of Reman and Tiber Septim? A legacy of the sword, of conquest, of pragmatism, of hunting down enemies and enforcing one's will upon the world? Or was it the legacy of the Greybeards, of Jurgen Windcaller, a legacy of restraint, of wisdom, of seeing a greater pattern, of understanding that true power lies not in its use, but in its mastery? The Chronicle does not record the choice. This is the true fate of the Last Dragonborn, and indeed, of all of Tamriel's greatest heroes. They are known in the deepest lore as prisoners, the Nerevarine, the hero of Kvatch, the Last Dragonborn. They all begin their story in a cell. They are agents of change, unbound by the chains of mortal fate that bind every other living thing. They can rewrite prophecy, they can kill gods, and once their great world-changing task is done, they vanish. Their story simply stops. The history books record their deeds, but never ever their end. The concept of the prisoner is one of the most esoteric in the Elder Scrolls, because the prisoner is an anomaly, a wound in the fabric of the Orbis, the universe. They possess a unique power. But this power comes at a cost. They are so unbound by destiny that they cannot have a final written one. Once their purpose in the great tapestry is complete, the thread just ends. There is no knot. There is no final bow. There is only an unwritten, unknowable void. They walk off the stage of history, and so the lore community, the great collective of in-game historians, is left only to debate. What happened to the most powerful Dovah-Kiin who ever lived? The theories are endless. The most popular and the most grim is the Apocrypha trap. Hermaeus Mora's final words to the Dragonborn are a chilling promise. You will be my new champion. Miraak's final words were a curse. May he reward you as he rewarded me. Did the Dragonborn, in their endless thirst for new shouts, new powers, new knowledge, keep reading the black books? Did they keep returning to that black ink sea of Apocrypha until one day they simply did not, or could not, return? Are they even now pacing the endless, mouldering libraries, having replaced Miraak as the eternal, trapped, and hopelessly powerful servant of the Gardener of Men? Another theory is the journey to Akavir. The Nerevarine, another great hero, famously sailed to Akavir, the Dragon Land. The Blades, the Dragonborn's sworn servants, are from Akavir. Did the Dragonborn, having defeated all foes in Tamriel, turn their eyes east? Did they sail across the ocean to the homeland of the Tsaishi to hunt the Dragon Eaters, or to find the Kapotun, the Tiger Dragon people, who are said to have their own Dragonborn-like leader, in a quest to find a true equal? Or perhaps it was a simple end. Were they finally assassinated by a new, more clever generation of Thalmor agents? Did they, in their godlike power, simply stop? Did they retire to a quiet house in Whiterun, raise a family and die of old age, their passing so normal that it was never recorded in any epic? It seems unlikely. Whatever the answer, their fate remains the ultimate mystery. And so, we look back at the full, bloody and glorious tapestry of the Dragonborn legacy. It began with Alessia. Her legacy was duty, a divine contract, a covenant, a chain that bound her bloodline to the throne in exchange for the world's safety. It was mirrored by Miraak. His legacy was hubris, a Daedric pact, a lust for power, a trap that bound his soul to a library for 4,000 years. It was reforged by Tiber Septim. His legacy was ambition, a mortal who, through blood and cunning, seized the bloodline and ascended to become a god, a throne of divine right. it was ended by Martin Septim. His legacy was sacrifice. A priest who, in the final moment, shattered the covenant and the bloodline, trading them both to forge a final permanent lock, sealing the gates of oblivion forever, and then the Last Dragonborn, the prisoner, the blank slate. Their legacy was not duty or hubris or ambition or sacrifice. Their legacy was choice. They were the only Dragonborn in history who was not bound. They were not born to a throne. They were not shackled by a covenant. They were not defined by a dark pact. They were a question, posed to the world, and their unwritten end is perhaps the final perfect answer. The chronicle stops, because the Last Dragonborn, for the first time, was finally and truly free. And now, the tale is told. The great chronicle of the Dovah-Kiin, from the chains of the Aeliads to the mists of Sovngarde, is complete. The fire in the hearth is burning low and the candles have guttered out. The sky outside is a deep, quiet and peaceful black. All of the dragons, all of the warlords, all of the mad kings, they are just stories, sleeping now as you should be. The adventures are over for tonight. The shouts have faded into echoes, and the echoes have faded into silence. There is nothing left to do now but let the weight of the day settle, to let your thoughts soften and slow, drifting from the peaks of Skyrim to the simple, quiet comfort of your own bed. You can feel the air in the room, still and cool. You can hear the soft, distant hum of the world outside, turning toward a new morning that is still many, many hours away. You are safe. You are sound. And the long, dark, peaceful night is here to hold you. So let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath grow slow and deep. There are no more prophecies to fulfill, no more tyrants to defeat. There is only this moment, this peace, this sleep.